Colonel Raymond Voss slid her file across the table, looked her dead in the eye, and said, the thing that would follow Maya Carter for 6 years. You don't belong on a trigger, Sergeant. You belong in a body bag detail. He didn't whisper it. He said it in front of the whole review board. Then he stamped her record, closed the folder, and smiled like he'd just fixed something broken. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. And that was the moment the Army decided to forget one of the best shooters it ever trained. Before we go on, if you believe some people get erased by the very system they served, subscribe to this channel and stay with Maya's story all the way to the end, because the ending changes everything. And do me one favor, comment the city you're watching from right now so I can see just how far Maya's story travels tonight. 6 years later, Maya Carter no longer flinched when someone called her just the medic. She had trained herself not to. She had trained herself the way she trained everything, quietly, without permission, without applause. A younger soldier at the aid station once asked her, half joking, whether she'd ever fired a rifle in her life. Maya had smiled, handed him a fresh roll of gauze, and said, "Focus on the pressure dressing pre-rin. That's the only trigger you need to worry about today." He'd laughed. She hadn't corrected him. Correcting people was a luxury she'd given up a long time ago. That was the thing about being forgotten. It didn't happen all at once. It happened one small silence at a time. The night everything changed, she was riding in the back of a transport with 4 other operators. All of them men, all of them attached to a joint task element, operating out of a forward camp in the Alaskan interior. The cold up there wasn't the kind of cold you complained about. It was the kind that got into the seams of your gear and stayed there. Maya sat with her medical ruck between her boots, her hands folded, listening to the others talk without joining in. "You ever work with a medic who used to be a shooter?" one of them asked. His name was Petty Officer Diaz, and he asked it the way people ask things when they already think they know the answer. "Once," another voice said. "That was Chief Ramsey, the senior man on the team. Long time ago. Didn't end well. For the medic or the shooter? Both, usually." Maya kept her eyes on the floor of the transport. She could feel Diaz glance at her, that quick look people gave when they were deciding whether she counted as part of the conversation. She'd felt that look 1,000 times. She had a whole system for not reacting to it. "What about you, Carter?" Diaz said. "You ever pick up anything heavier than a med kit?" "I pick up you when you fall down, Diaz," she said. "That heavy enough?" The transport laughed. Even Ramsey cracked a smile. That was the trick, and Maya knew it better than anyone. You made yourself easy to like and hard to see. You became furniture with a pulse. And furniture never had to explain the parts of itself that had been sanded off. But there was a 5th man on that team, and he did not laugh. His name was Lieutenant Commander Cole Hendricks, and he ran the SEAL element the task force had borrowed for the operation. He was younger than his rank suggested and older than his face. He didn't talk much, and when he did, people stopped what they were doing to listen. He'd spent the whole ride reading a laminated map by the light of a red lens, and Maya had assumed he wasn't paying attention to any of it. She was wrong. "Carter," Hendricks said without looking up. "Sir, you served under Voss." It wasn't a question. It landed like one anyway, and Maya felt the whole transport go a little quieter around it. She kept her voice level. "A long time ago, sir. He's the reason you carry a med kit instead of a rifle. He's one of the reasons." Hendricks finally looked up. He had the kind of eyes that didn't blink when they should. "You know what I heard about you, Sergeant? That I make a decent tourniquet, sir." "That's not what I heard." He folded the map along its creases, slow and deliberate. "I heard there was a shooter years back who made a call that saved a squad and cost her a career. I heard the board buried her so deep the paperwork forgot her name. And I heard she went and became a medic because saving people was the only part of the job nobody could take away from her." He paused. "Any of that sound familiar?" Maya didn't answer right away. In the front of the transport, Diaz had gone very still, and Chief Ramsey was looking at her now with something that wasn't quite the same as before. "That's a lot of rumors, sir," she said finally. "It is," Hendricks agreed. "Question is whether any of them are true." "Does it matter?" "It might." He tucked the map into his vest. "Before this night is over, it might matter a great deal." She wanted to ask him what he meant. She didn't. You learned in the Army not to chase the sentences that men like Hendricks left hanging. They usually led somewhere you didn't want to go. She had no idea how right she was. The mission was supposed to be simple. That was the first lie of the night, and every soldier in that transport had heard it before. There is no such thing as a simple mission. There are only missions that haven't gone wrong yet. The plan was reconnaissance, an enemy supply convoy moving equipment through a mountain valley under cover of the winter dark, resupplying a position that had been a thorn in the task force's side for weeks. The team's job was to observe, report, and if the window opened, to disable the convoy long enough for a strike element to finish the job. 6 operators, 1 medic, a designated marksman rifle carried by Chief Ramsey, and a heavier anti-material rifle, in a hard case, the kind of weapon that could reach across a valley and put a hole in an armored engine block. That anti-material rifle was the whole point. Without it, the mission was just 5 men and a medic freezing on a mountain watching a convoy roll by, unable to touch it. They inserted before midnight and moved into position along a ridgeline overlooking the pass. Maya set up her aid station in a hollow behind the shooters that was out of the way, close enough to reach anyone who went down. That was where medics lived, in the space just behind the fight, close enough to be useful and far enough to be forgotten. She was used to it. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. That was normal. Most of war is waiting. Maya used the time the way she always did, checking and rechecking her supplies, running through injury scenarios in her head, keeping her hands warm enough to work. She listened to the shooters talk over the low net, calling out cold ranges and wind reads, and she found herself doing something she hadn't let herself do in years. She was correcting them, not out loud, in her head. Ramsey called a wind hold that was a hair too aggressive for the temperature, and Maya's mind supplied the correction before she could stop it. Diaz misjudged a range to a reference point, and she caught the error the way you catch a wrong note in a song you used to sing. It was involuntary. It was muscle memory, and a muscle everyone thought had gone dead. She hated how good it felt. Convoy, Hendricks said over the net, and the whole ridge went taut. Maya lifted her head. Down in the valley, headlights had begun to crawl through the pass, dim and disciplined, the enemy running as dark as they could. She counted the vehicles the way an old habit counts. 6, no 7. The lead vehicle was armored. The kind of armor the designated marksman rifle couldn't touch. The kind of armor the anti-material rifle in the hard case was built to kill. Ramsey, get the 50 ready, Hendricks said. On it. Maya heard the hard case open. She heard the metallic sounds of a large weapon being assembled by cold hands. And then she heard something she would remember for the rest of her life. She heard Chief Ramsey stop. Sir, Ramsey said, and his voice had changed. We've got a problem. Talk to me. The 50's dead. Firing pin assemblies cracked. Looks like it took a hit somewhere in transport. A pause, and then quieter, the sound of a professional realizing he is holding a very expensive club. Sir, this rifle is not going to fire tonight. For a moment, nobody said anything. The valley kept filling with headlights. The convoy kept coming. Say again, Hendricks said, and there was steel under the calm now. The anti-material rifle is down, sir. We have no way to stop that lead vehicle. The DMR won't punch through that armor. We can watch them, we can call it in, but we cannot touch them. And that was when the night stopped being simple. Maya stayed very still in her hollow. This was not her fight. She was the medic. Her job started when the shooting did, when bodies started coming back to her with holes in them. She had spent 6 years being exactly what they'd made her. There was no reason to be anything else. Except she'd been running the corrections in her head all night. Except her hands still remembered a rifle they hadn't held in years. Except somewhere down in that valley, an armored vehicle was about to reach a crossing point, and once it did, an entire forward position was going to lose the only chance it would get to stop this convoy, and men were going to die later because of what didn't happen tonight. Options, Hendricks said. Fast. There aren't any good ones, sir, Ramsey said. We call it in and hope the strike element gets airborne before that convoy's over the pass. That's a long hope. How long? Too long. Maya closed her eyes. She thought about Colonel Voss sliding her file across the table. You don't belong on a trigger. She thought about 6 years of gauze and tourniquets, of being the medic, of being furniture with a pulse. She thought about the wind hole Ramsey had called that was a hair too aggressive and the range Diaz had misjudged, and how her mind had corrected both without asking her permission. And she thought the way she always thought when a decision was about to cost her something, that she could still choose to be nobody. She could sit in this hollow and let the convoy pass and go home the medic they wanted her to be, and no one would ever blame her because no one expected anything else. That was the trap. That had always been the trap. Being forgotten meant you were never required to be brave. Maya opened her eyes. Chief, she said, and her voice carried farther than she meant it to. What's your range to that lead vehicle? There was a silence on the net that had a texture to it. Say again, Ramsey said. Your range to the armored vehicle, what is it? Carter, this isn't a medical question. I know what it is. What's the range? Another pause. Then because he was a professional and professionals answer questions even when they don't understand them, Ramsey said, 1,400 meters to the crossing point. Give or take 1,400 meters in this cold, with a rifle that was never designed to reach that far into that kind of armor. It was not a shot, it was a fantasy with a caliber. Sir, Maya said, and now she was talking to Hendricks, and she could feel her whole life pivoting on the next sentence. I need the DMR. The net went dead silent. Say that again, Sergeant, Hendricks said very slowly. Give me the designated marksman rifle. Give me the range card, and give me 60 seconds. Diaz's voice cut in incredulous. Sir, she's the medic. I'm aware of what she is, petty officer. With respect, that's a 1,400-meter shot with a rifle that isn't built for it against armor. It can't penetrate in the dark in this cold. Nobody makes that shot, not our best shooter, not on our best day, and she's a corpsman. She asked for the rifle, Hendricks said. She could ask for a jet, doesn't mean we hand her one. And that was when Chief Ramsey spoke, and his voice had something in it Maya hadn't heard from anyone in 6 years. It wasn't respect exactly. It was something older and warier than respect. It was recognition. Sir, Ramsey said, I've been calling wind and range all night. And every time I've been a little off, I've had this feeling somebody was watching me. Be wrong. He turned in the dark, and even though Maya couldn't see his face, she could feel him looking at her. That was you, wasn't it, Carter? You've been shooting this whole valley in your head. Maya didn't answer. Her silence was the answer. How long, Ramsey said. How long since you've been behind a rifle for real? 6 years, she said. And before that? Before that, I was the best shooter Colonel Voss ever tried to bury. The wind moved across the ridge. The headlights crawled closer to the crossing point, and Lieutenant Commander Cole Hendricks made the decision that would either save his mission or end it, and either way would put Maya Carter's name back into the world she'd been erased from. Give her the rifle, he said. Sir, Diaz started. That's an order, petty officer. Give the medic the rifle. A pause and then something almost gentle under all that command. And somebody get me eyes on that convoy's speed. If we're going to do the impossible, I want to know exactly how much time the impossible has left. Maya crawled forward out of her hollow. She passed Diaz, who handed her the DMR with the reluctance of a man handing his car keys to a stranger. She passed Ramsey, who pressed the range card into her gloved hand and said low enough that only she could hear it. The scope's been drifting all night, Carter. The cold's pulling it. Whatever number's on that card, don't trust it. Trust yourself. I don't know if I remember how, she said. Yeah, you do, Ramsey said. You've been remembering all night. You just weren't allowed to say it out loud. She settled behind the rifle, and the moment the stock touched her shoulder, 6 years fell away like snow off a branch. It was all still there, the whole language of it, the way her body knew without being told how to fold itself around the weapon until she and the rifle were one nervous system. The way her breathing slowed on its own, dropping into the old rhythm, the one that lived somewhere below thought. Her cheek found the stock, her eye found the scope, and the world narrowed down to a circle of glass in a valley full of consequence. Talk to me, Carter, Hendricks said. Scope's drifted, she said. Ramsey's right. Cole's pulled the zero. I can't trust the card. Her mind was moving now, fast and clean, running the math it had run 1,000 times before anyone ever told her she didn't belong on a trigger. I need a reference shot, something out there I can hit and read the error off of. You want to fire a spotting round, they'll hear it. They'll hear the shot that stops their vehicle too, sir. At least this way I'll know where the second one's going. A beat. Then do it. Maya found a reference point downrange, a jut of frozen rock at a known distance off the range card, and she did the thing that no one on that ridge expected the medic to do. She built a firing solution from memory, held for the cold and the drift and the wind she could feel more than see, and she fired. The rifle spoke. The sound rolled down the valley. Down in the pass, the convoy hesitated. Headlights slowed. Somewhere in that column, a nervous driver had just heard a rifle shot echo off the mountains and didn't know where it came from. But Maya wasn't watching the convoy. She was watching her impact, reading the splash of it against the frozen rock, and her mind was doing the arithmetic of correction, the way it used to, subtracting the lie the scope was telling her from the truth of where the round actually went. High and left, she murmured. The cold's pulling worse than I thought. Her hands moved on the turrets, adjusting, rebuilding, correcting the correction. No computer, no support, no second chance. Just a woman and a rifle and 6 years of buried knowledge coming back to life all at once. Carter, Diaz said, and the incredulity was gone from his voice, now replaced by something closer to awe. That reference shot, that was dead on your call. You read that drift like you built the scope yourself. Quiet, Ramsey said. She's working. Down in the valley, the lead vehicle reached the last stretch before the crossing point. Once it crossed, it was gone. Once it was gone, the whole night was for nothing, and every man who died later at that forward position would die a little bit because of what Maya Carter chose not to do in the next 15 seconds. Speed on the lead vehicle, she asked. Slow and steady, Hendricks answered. Maybe 10 miles an hour over the ice. You've got a window of about 20 seconds before it hits the crossing. Then it's gone. 20 seconds, Maya breathed. And in those 20 seconds, something happened inside her that had nothing to do with rifles or ranges or ballistics. 6 years of being told what she was rose up in her chest, and for the first time she looked at all of it head on instead of swallowing it. Colonel Voss and his stamp, the board that never asked her side, the soldiers who'd called her just the medic and never once wondered why a corpsman knew Winholds by heart. All of it, all that silence and all that erasure sat in her chest like a stone. And she realized something that would carry her through everything still to come. They hadn't buried her because she failed. They'd buried her because she'd been right in a way that made the people above her look wrong. And a system will forgive almost anything before it forgives being embarrassed by the person it outranks. 15 seconds, Carter, Hendricks said. She thought about laying the rifle down. She thought about how easy it would be, how forgivable, how nobody would ever call it cowardice, because nobody had ever asked her to be brave in the first place. Then she thought about Sergeant Ethan Brooks. She hadn't thought about Ethan in years. He was the reason. He was the squad she'd saved all those years ago with the call that ended her career. She'd made a battlefield decision without authorization, and it had pulled 6 men out of a kill zone alive, and Ethan Brooks had walked home to his wife and his kids because Maya Carter did the thing that she wasn't supposed to do, and the Army had thanked her by pretending it never happened. If she laid this rifle down now, she'd be agreeing with them. She'd be saying that Voss was right, that she didn't belong on a trigger, that the best thing she'd ever done was a mistake that deserved to be erased. She was not going to agree with them. Not tonight, not ever again. 10 seconds, Hendricks said. I hear you, sir. Carter. His voice changed. It stopped being a commander's voice and became something else, something almost personal. Whatever they told you about yourself, whatever's on that file, Voss stamped. Right now on this ridge, you're the only shooter I've got, so I'm not going to call you a medic. A pause. Iron Wolf, you're up. The call sign hit her like cold water. Iron Wolf. She hadn't heard it in 6 years. It was the name they'd given her back before the burial, back when she was the shooter nobody could explain. She thought it had died with her career. She thought it had been stamped out along with everything else on that file. But Hendricks had known. Somehow he'd known the whole time. That was why he'd asked about Voss in the transport. That was why he'd left those sentences hanging. He hadn't borrowed a medic for this mission. He'd come looking for a ghost. Where did you hear that name? She whispered. Later, Hendricks said. Right now, there's a convoy in your valley, Iron Wolf, and you've got about 8 seconds to remind the United States military exactly who it decided to forget. Maya Carter put her eye back to the scope. The lead vehicle rolled toward the crossing point. Her breathing dropped into the old rhythm, slow and total, until the space between heartbeats stretched wide enough to fit a decision. She found the armored hull in her glass. She held for the drift in the cold and the wind, in the 6 years, in the stone in her chest, in Colonel Voss, in Ethan Brooks, and every soldier who'd ever looked right through her. The armor was too thick for a direct kill. She knew that. The DMR couldn't punch through the engine block the way the dead anti-material rifle would have. A lesser shooter would have thrown the round at the thickest part and prayed. Maya didn't pray. Maya looked for the one place on that vehicle that wasn't built to survive her. Every machine has a throat. Every armored beast has one seam, one joint, one vulnerable line where the engineering had to compromise. On that lead vehicle, low and forward where the armor met the drivetrain, there was a gap the width of a promise. Hit it, and you didn't destroy the vehicle. You did something better. You stopped it. You turned it into a 1,400-meter roadblock that would freeze the entire convoy in place with nowhere to go. That was the shot, not the shot they'd have expected. The shot only a shooter who'd forgotten more than they'd ever learned would even think to take. 5 seconds, Hendricks said, and then he said no more because there was nothing left to say. The valley held its breath. The convoy crawled toward the crossing. And Staff Sergeant Maya Carter, the medic, they forgot the shooter, they buried the ghost. They thought they'd stamped out of existence, slid her finger onto the trigger of a rifle that was never meant to make this shot, and got ready to remind all of them, Voss and the board and the whole machine, that erased her exactly what they had thrown away. She let out half a breath. She held the rest. And in the frozen silence of that Alaskan valley, with 6 years of being forgotten, resting on a single point of glass, Iron Wolf began to squeeze. The trigger broke. For one long, screaming instant, nothing existed except the recoil driving back into Maya's shoulder and the sound rolling out across the valley like a hammer dropped on the roof of the world. She didn't lift her head. She didn't blink. A shooter who lifts her head to admire the shot is a shooter who never learns whether she missed. She stayed in the glass watching the round travel a distance that no one on that ridge believed a designated marksman rifle could cover toward a seam of armor no wider than a promise. And then the lead vehicle died. It didn't explode. That was the thing Diaz would talk about later in the debriefs in the years that followed, the thing he could never quite explain to people who hadn't been there. There was no fireball, no Hollywood eruption. The armored vehicle simply lurched, coughed a gout of white steam into the frozen dark where its drivetrain used to work, and stopped. 1,400 meters away, a machine that weighed as much as a house had been turned into a wall by a single round placed in the one spot on its entire body that couldn't take it. The convoy behind it froze. She hit it, Diaz breathed. She actually hit it. That's not sir, that's not a real shot. People don't make that shot. That's sir, she hit it. Quiet, Ramsey said, but there was no bite in it. His voice was the voice of a man watching something he'd spend the rest of his life trying to describe. Maya finally came off the glass. Her heart was going like a hammer, but her hands were steady, and that steadiness told her something she hadn't let herself believe in 6 years. It was still there. All of it. The gift they'd tried to stamp out of her file was sitting right there in her hands, unkilled, unforgotten, waiting the whole time for someone to hand it a rifle and stop calling it a medic. Iron Wolf, Hendricks said over the net, and there was something in the way he said it that landed harder than any metal ever could. Confirm stop, lead vehicle is down. The pass is blocked. They can't back up, Ramsey added, already reading the terrain. Not on that ice, not with that grade behind them. She didn't just kill one vehicle, sir. She corked the whole bottle. That convoy is trapped. For about 4 seconds, the ridge felt like victory. Then the world remembered that it hates a shooter who wins. Down in the valley, the trapped convoy did what trapped things do. It got dangerous. Doors opened. Figures spilled out into the snow, small and fast and furious, and even at 1,400 meters, Maya could read the shape of what came next. They weren't running. Soldiers who run scatter. These men were organizing. They were pointing. They were doing the math on where a single rifle shot could have come from, and the math kept bringing them back to the ridge. They're dismounting, she said. Sir, they're not panicking. They're hunting. They know that shot came from up here, and they've got the manpower to come find out exactly where. How many, Hendricks said. More than us, Ramsey answered before Maya could. A lot more than us. The good feeling on that ridge evaporated so fast it left a chill behind it. 6 operators and a medic had just kicked a hornet's nest across a frozen valley, and now the hornets were counting. And that was when the second thing went wrong. Sir, it was the newest voice on the net, a young operator named Pruitt who'd been running comms all night from the far end of the position. His voice had climbed half an octave. Sir, we've got a problem with exfil. Talk. I've been trying to raise the strike element in the extraction bird for the last 90 seconds. I'm getting nothing, not static, nothing. Our comms package is down. And it didn't fade, sir, it dropped. All at once. Like somebody flipped a switch. The word hung there in the cold. Jammed. Nobody said it because saying it made it real. But every man on that ridge knew what it meant when comms didn't fade but dropped. The enemy in that valley wasn't just a supply convoy. Supply convoys don't carry electronic warfare packages capable of blacking out a task force's radios the instant they take fire. Somebody down there had known there might be watchers on the mountain and had come prepared to cut them off from help. So let me make sure I understand our situation, Hendricks said, and his calm had a new weight to it, the calm of a man doing hard arithmetic out loud. Our anti-material rifle is dead. Our comms are jammed. We have no way to call the strike element or the extraction bird. We are 7 people on a mountain, and somewhere between 40 and 60 enemy fighters just watched their convoy get stopped by a rifle shot and are now climbing this ridge to find whoever fired it. That's the situation, sir, Pruitt said miserably. And the only reason they know we're here, Diaz said slowly, is because we took the shot. Nobody answered him. Nobody had to. The shot that saved the mission was the same shot that painted a target on all of them, and every one of them knew it, and the man who felt it worst was the one who hadn't wanted her to take it in the first place. But Maya wasn't listening to the guilt in Diaz's voice. Maya was already somewhere else, somewhere colder and clearer, the place her mind went when a problem got too big to feel and had to be solved instead. Because there was a sound underneath all of this that only she seemed to be tracking, and it was the sound of Ethan Brooks breathing wrong. She turned, and in the low red light of the position, she saw it. In all the noise of the shot, in the trap, and the jammed comms, one of their own had gone down and nobody had noticed but her. It was Ethan. Not the Ethan of 6 years ago, the one she'd saved, the one whose survival had cost her a career. This was a different Ethan, a coincidence so cruel it barely felt like one. A young sergeant named Ethan Brooks who'd pulled the same name out of the same deep well of common American names and ended up on the same mountain as the woman whose whole life had been shaped by the first one. She hadn't let herself dwell on it when she met him. Now the universe was making her dwell on it because this Ethan Brooks was lying in the snow with a spreading dark stain on his side, and the enemy's opening volley from the valley floor had found him before anyone even knew they were being shot at. "Man down," Maya said, and her voice cut through the net like a blade. "Brooks is hit. Left flank low. I'm moving." "Carter, we need you on that rifle," Ramsey started. "You need me on Brooks, or you need a body bag, Chief, pick one." She was already crawling, already trading the shooter for the medic in the space of a single breath. And the terrible beauty of it was that she didn't have to choose which one she was, because tonight the mountain was going to demand both. She reached him. Her hands were on the wound before her knees had stopped sliding, reading the damage through the layers of frozen gear, the way she'd read the scope drift by feel, by memory, by the deep animal fluency of someone who has done a thing 10,000 times. "Carter," Brooks gasped. He was young, too young for how gray his face already was. "Carter, I can't, it's not how bad." "You're going to be annoying about it. That's how bad," she said, packing the wound, her voice light in a way that had nothing to do with how she felt. "You're going to be one of those guys who tells this story at every reunion until everybody is a sick of you. Stay with me, Brooks. Give me your eyes. Right here." "I heard the shot," he whispered. "The big one, the impossible one. Was that did somebody did? Was it you?" She pressed down harder on the dressing than she strictly needed to and told herself it was clinical. "Focus on breathing, Sergeant. That's the only trigger you need to worry about right now." The line came out of her before she could stop it, the same line she'd given the private at the aid station, and she heard the crack in her own voice as she said it, because she suddenly understood that she'd been saying that line for 6 years to keep from admitting the truth. She'd made herself into someone who talked people out of asking whether she'd ever been a shooter. She'd built a whole personality out of deflection. And now here was a boy blistering in the snow asking her the question straight, and for the first time she didn't want to lie about the answer. "Yeah," she said quietly so only he could hear it. "It was me. Now stay alive so I can tell you the rest of the story." Brooks almost smiled. Then his eyes rolled and Maya caught his jaw and brought him back with a sharpness that would have startled anyone who thought they knew her. Above and behind her, the mountain was turning into a fight. They're at the base of the ridge, Ramsey reported, his voice clipped and fast. Moving up in two elements. They're smart, sir. They're bounding one group covers while the other climbs. This isn't a convoy escort. These are trained troops, which means our friendly supply run was bait, Hendricks said, and Maya heard the click of understanding in his voice, the sound of a commander realizing the shape of the trap he'd walked into. Or a Trojan horse. They wanted eyes to come look at that convoy, and they came ready to eat whoever showed up. Pruitt, I don't care what you have to do, you get me one clean transmission. One, I need the strike element to know we're compromised. I'm trying, sir. The jamming is, try harder. Maya finished packing Brooks's wound and cinched the last strap on the pressure dressing. He was stable. Stable was a temporary word on a mountain like this, but it was the only word she had and she'd take it. She dragged him back into the cover of the hollow where she'd spent the first quiet hours of the night, and then she looked back down the slope at the fight climbing toward them, and she did the math that only she could do. The math was ugly. 6 shooters, one of them now splitting his attention to guard a wounded man against 40 or more climbing troops. On the open slope in the cold with no anti-material rifle and no comms and no way to call the cavalry. It wasn't a fight you won, it was a fight you survived if you were lucky, and their luck had already been spent on one impossible shot. But Maya Carter had learned something in 6 years of being forgotten that none of these men had ever had to learn. She'd learned that when you can't win the fight in front of you, you change what the fight is about. She crawled back to the DMR. Iron Wolf's back on the gun, she said. Carter, you don't have to. Diaz started, and she cut him off. Diaz, listen to me. We can't kill our way out of this. There's too many of them and not enough of us, and every round we spend, they'll spend 3. But they don't know that. Right now down there, they think there's a whole element up here because one rifle just reached across the valley and did something a whole element couldn't. So we're going to let them keep thinking that. We're not going to fight 40 men. We're going to make 40 men afraid of the dark. There was a silence on the net, and then Hendricks said slowly, explain. Fear is a force multiplier, sir. You said it yourself. They're bounding. They're careful. They're smart. Smart troops are cautious troops, and cautious troops are slow. I don't need to hit 40 men. I need to hit the right men at the right moment, so the other 39 spend the whole climb wondering if they're next. Every time they get brave, I take the brave one. Every time they bunch up, I split them. I'm not going to break their bodies. I'm going to break their nerve. And a scared enemy climbing a mountain in the dark makes mistakes, and mistakes buy us the time Pruitt needs to punch a message through that jamming. For a long moment, nobody spoke, and Maya understood that she was right now in this frozen dark doing the exact thing that had gotten her buried 6 years ago. She was making a call above her station. She was a staff sergeant medic telling a SEAL element how to fight. She was being right in a way that made the chain of command uncomfortable, and she braced for the pushback she'd learned to expect her whole career. The shutdown, the reminder of what she was, the file sliding across the table. It didn't come. You heard her, Hendricks said. Iron Wolf runs the shooting. Everybody else controlled fire-conserved rounds. We make them earn every meter. Pruitt, get me that transmission. Carter, break their nerve. And Maya Carter, the medic, they forgot, took a breath and went to work. What happened over the next 20 minutes was something the men on that ridge would argue about for years because it didn't look like any firefight any of them had ever been in. It was quieter than a firefight. It was more patient. It was a woman with a drifting scope and a rifle that wasn't built for the picking the climbing enemy apart not by volume but by timing, by psychology, by an understanding of fear that she'd earned in 6 years of being on the receiving end of it. When a group of 4 bunched behind a boulder to gather themselves for the next bound, Maya put a round into the snow, inches from the boldest one's hand, close enough to spray ice into his face, far enough that he lived to tell the others how close it had been. The 4 of them didn't move for 90 seconds. 90 seconds was an eternity on a mountain. When a single fighter got out ahead of the rest, sprinting up the slope with the reckless courage of a man trying to prove something, Maya let him get almost to a false crest and then took him clean. And the sight of him folding into the snow, with no warning shot, no sound, they could place made every man behind him press himself flat and stop believing the mountain was survivable. They've stopped bounding, Ramsey reported, disbelief bleeding into his voice. Sir, they're not moving. She's got 40 trained troops pinned to a hillside and she's barely fired a dozen rounds. How's she doing it? Diaz said. She's not shooting him, Ramsey said quietly. She's shooting the idea of climbing. Every one of those men down there has decided the next step might be his last, and none of them can figure out where the shooter is. And there's nothing on this earth that slows a man down like not knowing where death is coming from. Maya heard all of it and filed none of it. She was in the glass. She was in the cold patient place. She reloaded with hands that didn't shake, read the drift on her scope that kept trying to lie to her, corrected the correction, and waited for the next brave man to volunteer for her attention. Behind her, she could hear Ethan Brooks breathing steady and shallow, and she'd tuned her ear so that any change in that rhythm would pull her off the rifle in an instant. She was holding two jobs at once, the shooter and the medic. And the strange thing, the thing she'd never admit to anyone, was that she felt more whole doing both than she'd felt in 6 years of doing only one. Then the twist came the way twists always come on a mountain from the direction nobody was watching. "Sir," Pruitt said, and his voice had gone strange and tight. "I got through, just for a second. I punched a burst transmission through a gap in the jamming, and I got an acknowledgement." "That's good, Pruitt," Hendricks said. "That's exactly what we—" "No, sir, it's not." Pruitt swallowed audibly over the net. "The acknowledgement. It wasn't from the strike element. It came back on the strike element's frequency with the strike element's call sign, but, sir, the authentication was wrong. The countersign was 1 cycle old. Somebody down in that valley is sitting on our frequencies, running our call signs, and they just tried to talk me into telling them our position by pretending to be our own rescue." The cold on that mountain got a whole lot colder. "Say that again," Hendricks said very slowly. "They've got our comms plans, sir, not just the jammer. They have our frequencies and our call signs. Somebody gave it to them. This wasn't a convoy that got lucky. They knew we were coming. They knew what net we'd use. They knew everything except that the anti-material rifle would break and a medic would pick up a rifle and stop their lead vehicle." Pruitt's voice cracked. "Sir, somebody on our side told them we were coming. There it was. The thing under the thing. The reason the comms didn't fade but dropped, the reason a supplied convoy carried electronic warfare gear, the reason the enemy came up the mountain like they already knew the ground. Somebody had sold them. Somebody with access to the mission plan had handed the enemy a map of this exact night, and the only variable the traitor hadn't accounted for was the ghost in the file. The shooter nobody remembered, the one contingency that no plan on either side had thought to include, because everyone had agreed 6 years ago that Maya Carter no longer existed. And Maya, lying behind her rifle with her finger off the trigger and her heart suddenly pounding for a reason that had nothing to do with the fight, felt a piece of her own history slide into place with a click she felt in her teeth. "Sir," she said, "ask Pruitt what the counter-sign was, the wrong one they sent back, the one that was a cycle old. Carter, this isn't the moment. Ask him, sir, please, I need to hear it." A pause. Then Pruitt read off the authentication string, the challenge, and the stale response, the words that were supposed to prove a friend and instead had exposed an enemy. And Maya went cold in a way the Alaskan night had nothing to do with, because she knew that countersign protocol. She knew the specific idiosyncratic one-cycle lag in the way it had been generated, because she'd seen that exact signature once before in an after-action report she was never supposed to read 6 years ago on the desk of the man who'd stamped her file and slid it across a table and told a whole review board that she belonged in a body bag detail. "I know who sold us," she said. Her voice was so quiet that Hendricks had to key his radio twice to make sure he'd heard it. "I know who gave them the plan. And sir, you're not going to believe me because 6 years ago nobody did." "Try me, Iron Wolf," Hendricks said. "After what I've watched you do tonight, I'll believe just about anything." Maya Carter closed her eyes, and for the first time in 6 years, she said the name out loud. "Colonel Raymond Voss." The name landed on the net like a round in the snow. "The officer who buried me," she said. "The one who took my qualification and stamped my file and made me a medic. That countersign protocol, that one-cycle lag. That's his. It was his personal signature on secure comms, a lazy habit he never fixed because he never thought anyone below him was paying attention. I was paying attention. I always was. That's why he buried me. Because I noticed things I wasn't supposed to notice. And one of the things I noticed was that Colonel Voss's operations had a way of going wrong in expensive, specific ways, and every time they did, somebody on the other side got very, very lucky." She opened her eyes. "He didn't bury me because I embarrassed him on the range, sir. He buried me because I was one report away from figuring out what he was. The silence on that ridge was total. Even the fight seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere down the slope, 40 enemy troops were still pinned by their fear of a shooter they couldn't find. Somewhere in a warm operations center, far from this frozen valley, a colonel who'd built his career on the graves of missions like this one was waiting to hear that the problem on the mountain had been solved. And here on the ridge, 7 people who were never supposed to survive the night held on to a truth that had just gotten a great deal more dangerous than the enemy climbing toward them. If that's true, Hendricks said slowly, then that transmission Pruitt punched through the one Voss's people answered. Told them exactly where we are, Maya finished. The second Pruitt keyed that mic, they got a fix. The pinned troops on the slope are going to know it any second. The fear I built is about to break because they're not going to have to find us anymore. They already know. And as if the mountain itself had been listening, the character of the fight changed. Down the slope, the pinned enemy troops surged up off the hillside all at once, no longer bounding, no longer cautious, moving with the ugly confidence of men who've just been told exactly where their target is and no longer have to guess. Here they come, Ramsey said. All of them. Sir, they've got our position. Rounds are going to run out before they do, Diaz said, and for the first time his voice held the flat calm of a man doing his own private math and not liking the answer. Maya's mind raced through options like a hand riffling a deck. The fear was gone. The psychological game was over. She couldn't break the nerve of men who no longer had to wonder where death was coming from. Everything she'd built in the last 20 minutes had just collapsed because a traitor, 1,000 miles away, had handed the enemy the one thing she couldn't fight: certainty. And then she thought about the thing that had started all of it, the dead anti-material rifle, the weapon that broke and started this whole terrible night. Ramsey had said the firing pin assembly was cracked, that it would never fire, that it was a very expensive club. A very expensive club that could still reach 1,400 meters if only it could fire. Chief, she said, the 50, the dead one, you said the firing pin's cracked. How cracked? Is it split clean through or is it fractured? Carter, it's dead. It doesn't matter how. It matters more than anything on this mountain right now, Chief, so I need you to look at it and tell me exactly what's broken, because I have spent 6 years fixing things I wasn't supposed to be able to fix with less than what's in your kit. And if there is any way at all to get one round through that rifle, then the men climbing this slope are about to walk into something a designated marksman rifle can't do and an anti-material rifle can. There was a scramble in the dark, the sound of Ramsey tearing open the hard case, the sound of a professional examining a broken thing with new and desperate eyes. It's fractured, Ramsey said, not split. Theoretically, if you could immobilize the fragment, if you could brace it so it holds together for exactly one strike. But Carter, that's one round maybe, and it could just as easily blow up in your face as fire. I'm not going to hand you a rifle that might. One round is all I need, Chief, Maya said, and it's not going to blow up in my face. You don't know that. No, she agreed. I don't, but I know what happens to every person on this mountain if I don't try. So slide it over here and hand me your kit and give me 60 seconds. And Chief, she paused and something moved through her voice that hadn't been there in 6 years. Something that sounded almost like the woman she'd been before a colonel decided she didn't exist. The last time somebody handed me an impossible shot tonight, I stopped a convoy with it. Trust me one more time. The hard case slid across the frozen ground and bumped against her hip. And as the enemy climbed toward them with certainty in their boots and a traitor's fix in their radios, Maya Carter set down the rifle that had brought her back from the dead and picked up the broken one that had started it all and bent over it in the freezing dark with a medic's hands and a shooter's heart, and began with 60 seconds on the clock and 40 men on the slope to bring the dead thing back to life. Her hands moved. The fracture was worse than she'd hoped and better than she'd feared. She could work with worse than she'd hoped. She'd been working with worse than she'd hoped her entire life. 40 seconds, Pruitt said, tracking the climbers. I hear you. Carter, if that thing blows, then I won't hear the next thing you say. 20 more seconds of quiet, Diaz. Give me that. She braced the fractured firing pin the way Ramsey said couldn't be done, wedging it, immobilizing it, turning a broken weapon into a single-use tool that would either send one round 1,400 meters or take her hand off at the wrist. She didn't let herself think about which. Thinking about which was a luxury, and she'd given up luxury 6 years ago along with her name. 30 seconds until they're on us, Ramsey said. Maya seated the round. She closed the action with the delicacy of someone defusing a bomb because in a sense she was. She got behind the rifle that everyone said was dead, the rifle whose death had started this whole impossible night, and she found in her glass not the lead vehicle this time, but the tight cluster of men who thought certainty had made them safe. You told me nobody makes the shot with the wrong weapon, she murmured, and it wasn't clear whether she was talking to Diaz or to Ramsey or to a colonel 1,000 miles away or to a review board 6 years in the past. You were right. Nobody does. She let out half a breath and held the rest. That's why they forgot the only person who could. And with a dead rifle brought back to life by a forgotten shooter, with 40 men closing the last 30 meters and a traitor's name burning in her chest and a wounded boy breathing behind her in the snow. Staff Sergeant Maya Carter settled the impossible weapon against her shoulder and got ready to fire the shot that no one on either side of this frozen valley would ever be able to explain. She fired the dead rifle. The sound it made was wrong. Every man on that ridge knew it in the same instant because a healthy anti-material rifle speaks with one clean voice, and this one screamed a torn and ragged bark that told anyone who understood weapons that something inside it had just barely held together. The recoil kicked back into Maya's shoulder hard enough to bruise bone, and a piece of the fractured firing assembly spat sideways out of the action and buried itself in the snow beside her cheek, close enough that she felt the heat of it. But the round flew. That was the only thing that mattered. The round flew, and it flew true, and 1,400 meters down the slope it arrived among the cluster of men who thought certainty had made them safe, and it did what a .50 caliber round does when it finds a target that expected a rifle bullet and got a freight train instead. The lead climbers went down in a way that broke something in the men behind them, and the mountain, which had been surging with confidence, a heartbeat before stopped. They stopped, Diaz whispered. Sir, they stopped again. She that was the dead gun fired. Once, Ramsey said, staring at the wreck of the rifle in Maya's hands. That gun fired exactly once, and it's never going to fire again. And Carter knew that, and she made the one round count. He turned in the dark. That should not have worked. You understand that, right? That should have taken your hand off. It didn't, Maya said, already setting the ruined weapon aside, already reaching for the DMR again, because she had bought seconds, not minutes, and seconds were all a mountain ever gave you. Sometimes the thing everyone gives up on has exactly one good shot left. You just have to be willing to bleed for it. She didn't mean to say it like that. She heard how it sounded the moment it left her mouth, and she knew that every man on that ridge heard it too because she wasn't talking about the rifle anymore, and all of them knew it. The thing everyone gave up on. The thing with one good shot left. She'd been describing herself, and she hadn't even meant to, and the silence that followed had a weight to it that the fight had not. Carter, Hendricks said quietly, how long can you keep them off us? Maya settled back behind the designated marksman rifle and put her eye to the scope, and did the math the way she always did, cold and clean, and without mercy toward her own hopes. The .50 bought us 3 minutes of fear, maybe 4. After that, they're going to realize the big gun only fired once, and they're going to figure out it can't fire again, and when they do, the certainty comes back, and they come up this slope, and there's 40 of them, and there's us. She paused. So the honest answer, sir, is not long enough. Unless Pruitt gets us help, we're going to run out of mountain before they run out of men. Pruitt, Hendricks said, talk to me. I'm working it, sir. The young operator's voice was frayed to threads. The jamming's still up, but it's not perfect. It's got gaps. I've found one gap, and I punched through it once, and that's how the traitors people got our fix. But sir, here's the thing. If I can find another gap, and if I can push a burst through it fast enough that they can't triangulate off it, I might be able to reach the strike element for real this time. Not Voss's people, the real element. But I need time, and I need them to not be shooting at me while I do it. And you've got both, Maya said. That's my job. You find the gap. I keep the mountain quiet. Everybody else you protect Pruitt, and you protect Brooks, and you let me do the shooting. She was already reading the slope, already picking out the men who would get brave first. Diaz, I need you next to me. Not shooting, spotting. You've got young eyes and I've got a scope that lies to me, and between the two of us, we're going to make 40 men believe there's 100 of us up here. Diaz slid into position beside her without a word of argument, and that more than anything else that had happened on the mountain and told Maya how completely the night had rearranged the world. 20 minutes ago, Diaz had looked at her like a stranger holding his car keys. Now he was lying in the snow at her shoulder, waiting for her to tell him what she saw, treating her word as law. She'd earned it one round at a time. There, Diaz said, 2 o'clock low behind the rocks. 3 of them. They're going to try to flank us along that draw. I see them. Maya's finger found the trigger. Watch what fear does. She didn't shoot the men in the draw. She shot the rock face above them deliberately, precisely, so that a shower of ice and stone rained down into their flanking route and told them without killing a soul that the shooter on the ridge had seen them coming and could reach them anytime she wanted. The 3 of them scrambled back the way they'd come, and Maya let them go, and Diaz let out a breath that fogged in the cold. You could have killed them, he said. I don't need them dead. I need them scared. A dead man stops 1 soldier. A terrified man who runs back to his friends stops 5 because he tells them what happened, and now all 6 of them are thinking about that rock face instead of about us. She was already tracking the next threat. 6 years ago, they told me I was too willing to make my own calls, that I didn't respect the doctrine. Maybe they were right. But doctrine says you win a firefight with volume and we don't have volume, so we're going to win it with something they can't put in a manual. Which is what? The unshakable belief, Maya said, taking another shot that cracked into the snow beside a man who'd gotten too bold, sending him diving for cover. That the person on this ridge cannot be beaten. It isn't true, but they don't know that. And as long as they don't know it, it might as well be. Behind them, Ethan Brooks stirred, and Maya's ear caught the change in his breathing before her mind did, and she was halfway turned toward him before she'd made the decision to move. He's crashing, she said. Diaz, you have the slope. Anybody gets past that false crest, you put a round near them, not in them near them, you understand. By fear, not bodies. I've got Brooks. She crossed to the wounded sergeant on her knees, and her hands were back inside the dressing before her brain had finished cataloging what was wrong, and what was wrong was that the cold was doing to Brooks what the bullet hadn't quite managed. His body was shutting down degree by degree the way bodies did on mountains, and there was no warming tent and no evac bird and no golden hour. There was only a medic with cold hands and a dwindling kit and a boy who kept trying to apologize. Sorry, Brooks whispered. Sorry, Carter. I'm making you. You should be shooting. You're going to stop apologizing is what you're going to do. She got another blanket over him, pressed her own body heat against his side, worked the math of shock and cold and blood loss in the part of her mind that never stopped calculating. You know why I became a medic, Brooks, after they took the rifle away? Why he breathed because she needed him talking and he knew it, and he was trying. Because they told me I couldn't be trusted with a weapon. So I found the one job in the whole army where nobody could take my hands away from me. They can take the rifle. They can take the qualification. They can take your name right out of the file and pretend you were never a shooter at all. Her hands worked as she talked, steady and sure. But they can't take the fact that when a man is dying in the snow, I know exactly what to do about it. That's mine. Nobody gave it to me, and nobody can ungive it. And right now, tonight, I get to be both things at once. And you want to know the truth, Brooks? For 6 years, I told myself I didn't miss the rifle. I lied. I missed it every single day. And I hated that I missed it because missing it meant they'd taken something real. Are you... Brooks's eyes fluttered. Are you glad, tonight, that you got it back? Maya went still for half a second, the honest half second that a question like that deserved. Ask me when we're off this mountain, she said. If we're off this mountain, I'll give you a real answer. Right now, I need you to keep breathing so there's somebody around to answer it to. Carter, Diaz called from the rifle, tight and urgent. They're figuring it out, the big gun. They've noticed it hasn't fired again. Sir, they're getting their nerve back. They're starting to move as a group. This is the fears breaking. The 3 or 4 minutes Maya had predicted were up exactly as she'd said they would be. The mountain had done the math on the dead rifle and reached the same conclusion Maya had reached, that the 50 was a one-time miracle, and with that certainty restored, the enemy began once more to climb. Pruitt, Hendricks said, and his voice had the edge of a man watching his last card come up. Tell me you found a gap. I found a gap, sir. Pruitt's voice was electric. It's narrow and it's going to close, and I get one shot at it, one burst, and if the traitor's people are monitoring, they'll get another fix off me. But if I time it right, the real strike element gets our position and our situation before Voss's people can do anything about it. But sir, the second I key that mic, they know exactly where we are again, and this time there's no fear game left to slow them down. It's a straight race. Our message versus their assault, and I don't know which one gets there first. Maya crossed back to the rifle and dropped in beside Diaz, and put her eye to the glass and saw in that circle of drifting scope 40 men who had stopped being afraid. Do it, she said before Hendricks could answer, and then catching herself, sir, say the word. But it's the only move we've got. Pruitt keys the mic, the real cavalry learns. We're alive, and I keep this slope frozen for as long as I have rounds and breath. That's the whole plan. That's all of it. There's nothing else. Hendricks was quiet for exactly 1 second, and Maya understood that in that second he was weighing her life and Pruitt's and every man on that ridge, and weighing them against a plan authored by a medic he'd known for a matter of hours, and she braced out of 6 years of habit for the answer to be no. Send it, Pruitt, Hendricks said. Iron Wolf, hold the line. Everybody else, this is the fight. Right here, right now, make it count. Pruitt keyed the mic, and the mountain came apart. The instant that burst transmission went out, the enemy assault stopped pretending to be careful. 40 men surged up the slope in a single roaring wave. No more bounding, no more caution, just the raw arithmetic of numbers against a position they now knew was thin. Muzzle flashes bloomed across the hillside like a field of terrible flowers. Rounds cracked overhead and chewed into the frozen ground around the ridge, and for the first time all night, the fight became the kind of fight the men on that ridge understood loud and close and desperate. Maya went to work. She did not miss. That was the thing Diaz would say later in the debriefs in the years that followed, the thing he said with the flat certainty of a man who'd seen it with his own eyes. In the worst 2 minutes of the whole night, with rounds coming in and men screaming and the cold turning her fingers to wood, Maya Carter did not miss. She let the psychological game go because there was no time for it now, and she became the thing they'd tried to erase, the pure and terrible instrument that a colonel had looked at once and decided was too dangerous to let exist. Every trigger pull found a man. Every man she found stopped the momentum of the 10 behind him. She was 1 rifle against 40, and she made the 40 pay for every meter of the mountain as though the slope itself were made of her will. On your right, Diaz shouted. Carter, right, they're almost. She took the man on the right without seeming to look, a shot that Diaz would never be able to explain, and pivoted back to the center of the assault. And behind her, she heard Ramsey and Hendricks and the others firing in disciplined bursts, protecting Pruitt, protecting Brooks, protecting the thin frozen line that was all that stood between 7 people and the end of the night. How many rounds? Hendricks called. Not enough, Maya answered, and it was the truth. She could feel the weight of her remaining magazines the way you feel the last of anything. And the arithmetic was closing in, and she knew with the cold clarity that had never once left her that the math did not work. She could hold the slope for another minute, maybe 2, and then the rifle would run dry and the fear game was spent, and 40 men minus however many she'd stopped was still far, far more than 7. Pruitt, Hendricks shouted over the noise. Anything at all. Nothing yet, sir. I sent it. I know it went out. I don't know if... And then Pruitt stopped talking because something had changed in the sky. At first, Maya thought it was the wind. Then she thought it was her own pulse in her ears. And then the sound resolved into the one sound that every soldier on a doomed mountain prays for and half believes will never come. The deep chopping thunder of rotor blades coming in low and fast and angry over the ridgeline. And the night lit up not with the enemy's muzzle flashes, but with the disciplined hammering fire of an attack aircraft that had just been told by a burst transmission punched through a gap in the jamming by a terrified young operator, exactly where its friends were pinned and exactly where its enemies were climbing. The strike element had heard them. The real one, not Voss's people. The real cavalry arriving in the last possible seconds, walking a wall of fire across the slope below the ridge that turned the enemy assault from a roaring wave into a scattering broken thing. The men who'd climbed the mountain with such certainty discovered all at once that the certainty had been a lie, that the thin position they'd been about to overrun had teeth in the sky, and the assault that had been 30 seconds from success came apart in the space of a single terrible minute. They came Diaz breathed, his voice cracking. Sir, they came. They actually, Pruitt, you did it, you. Iron Wolf did it, Pruitt said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't just relief. She kept them off me long enough to send it. If she breaks even 1 second sooner, they get a fix and finish us before the message lands. She held the whole mountain on one rifle so I could push 6 seconds of transmission through a gap the size of a keyhole. He laughed, a ragged, disbelieving sound. The medic held the mountain. Maya didn't hear most of it. Maya had already turned away from the scattering enemy in the arriving aircraft and the salvation roaring in overhead, because the moment the pressure came off the slope, her whole world had collapsed back down to the sound of Ethan Brooks, not breathing right. Brooks, she was on him in an instant. Brooks, stay with me. The birds are here. You hear that? That's the cavalry. That's your ride home. Don't you dare, Brooks, look at me. His eyes found hers barely. He whispered, you're glad, I can tell. About the rifle. You're glad. I told you to ask me when we were off the mountain. We're a thin ghost of a smile. We're basically off the mountain. We are not basically anywhere you keep breathing. But her hands were already doing the work and already fighting the cold and the shock and the long night's toll. And some part of her that she would never show anyone was breaking because she'd stopped a convoy and broken an assault and named a traitor and held a mountain. And none of it would mean anything if this boy died in the snow while the rescue birds landed 100 meters away. Medic, Hendricks called, and then catching himself using the name that meant more Iron Wolf. The bird's on the ground. What do you need? I need him on it 30 seconds ago. Maya's voice was iron. Ramsey Diaz, leader. Now we move him gentle, but we move him fast, and somebody radio that bird that I'm coming aboard with him, and I am not leaving his side until there's a surgeon with his hands in this wound. Is that understood, sir? Understood, Hendricks said. And he didn't say it like a commander humoring a subordinate. He said it like a man taking an order from the one person on the mountain who'd earned the right to give them. They moved Brooks. They moved him the way Maya said, gentle and fast, her hands never leaving the wound, her voice never leaving his ear, and the rescue bird's crew reached out and pulled them both aboard into a wash of noise and heat and light. And as the aircraft lifted off that frozen ridge, carrying 7 people who were never supposed to survive the night, Maya knelt over Ethan Brooks with her whole weight on the dressing and her whole heart in her throat, and looked out the open door at the mountain falling away below her. The mountain that had tried to kill them. The mountain where a medic had picked up a rifle and become a ghost again. The mountain where she'd fired a shot no one would ever be able to explain, and then another, and then held a line that could not be held, all because 6 years ago, a man had decided she didn't belong on a trigger and buried her so deep the paperwork forgot her name. And now she had a name for the man. Colonel Raymond Voss. Sir, she said over the roar of the rotors, and Hendricks leaned in to hear her. When we get back, there's going to be a debrief, and they're going to want to know how a medic stopped convoy and held a ridge. And I'm going to tell them, but sir, before I tell them any of it, I need you to make sure of one thing. Her eyes came up and they had a fire in them that 6 years of being forgotten had never quite put out. I need you to make sure that the person who takes my debrief is not in any way in any part of the chain connected to Colonel Voss. Because the last time I told the truth about what happened on a mountain, the man I told it to slid my file across a table and made me disappear. And it is not going to happen twice. Hendricks looked at her for a long moment, the aircraft shuddering around them, Brooks breathing shallow and stubborn under her hands, the frozen valleys shrinking to nothing in the door. Iron Wolf, he said, after tonight there is not a person alive who can make you disappear again. He keyed his radio, his eyes never leaving hers. I've got 40 witnesses and a gun camera in a burst transmission that a lot of people are going to want to explain. And I promise you this, whoever sold us that mountain is going to find out exactly what it cost him. He paused, starting with the fact that the ghost he buried just came back with his name in her mouth. Beneath her hands, Ethan Brooks drew one more breath and then another, holding on to the thin edge of alive with the same stubbornness that had kept Maya Carter on that trigger when every reason in the world said to lay it down. The rescue bird banked toward the distant lights of the base, toward warmth and surgeons and the long reckoning that was coming for all of them. And Maya Carter, medic and shooter ghost and witness, held a dying boy together with her bare hands and looked back one last time at the mountain that had given her back her name and understood that the fight on the ridge had only ever been the easy part. The hard part was waiting at the bottom of the mountain in a warm room behind a desk, wearing the uniform of the man who had spent 6 years making sure this night could never happen. And she was going to walk right into it. The bird touched down at the base in the gray hour before dawn, and the war Maya Carter had survived on the mountain traded itself in the span of one rotor wind down for a quieter and more dangerous kind of war, the kind fought in warm rooms behind closed doors by men who never had to feel the cold. She didn't let go of Ethan Brooks. That was the first thing. The medical team met the aircraft with a gurney and a shouting urgency, and hands reached in to take the wounded sergeant from her, and Maya went with him. She kept her palm on the dressing, across the tarmac, and through the doors and down the corridor, and when a surgeon tried to peel her away, she looked at him with eyes that had held a mountain and said, "My hand comes off this wound when your hand goes into it, not 1 second before." And the surgeon who had never met her, who knew nothing about a convoy or a ridge or a colonel, took one look at whatever was in her face and decided not to argue. It was only when the operating room doors swung shut, with Brooks alive on the other side of them, and a team of people whose whole job was keeping him that way, that Maya finally let her hand fall to her side. And she stood there in the corridor, in her frozen gear with a stranger's blood dried to her sleeves, and for about 4 seconds she had nothing left to do, and the 4 seconds nearly took her apart. Then Hendricks was there. "He's gonna make it," Hendricks said. "The surgeon told me on the way in. Because of what you did on the mountain, he's gonna make it." "He's not out yet." "No, but he's got a chance he wasn't supposed to have. You gave him that." Hendricks studied her the way he'd studied her in the transport a lifetime ago, with those eyes that didn't blink when they should. "Carter, Maya, you've been running on nothing for 6 hours. There's a rack with your name on it, and hot food and a shower, and every single person on that mountain would tell you to go take all three." "Is that an order, sir?" "It's a suggestion." "Then respectfully, I'm going to decline it." She straightened, and the exhaustion sat on her like a second uniform. And she wore it anyway. Because somewhere in this building, there's a debrief being scheduled, and somewhere else there's a colonel named Voss finding out that the mission he sold didn't go the way he sold it. And I've been on the wrong end of that man's paperwork once already. I'm not going to be asleep when he makes his move. Hendricks was quiet a moment. "You really think he's here, on this base?" "I think a man who sells missions likes to be close enough to manage the fallout. I think the countersign lag I heard on that net was his, and I think the reason it was his is that he was running the enemy's response personally from close by, because a man like Voss doesn't trust anyone else to bury his mistakes." She met his eyes. "And I think that when he learns there were witnesses and a gun camera and a burst transmission with a timestamp, the first thing he's going to do is try to control the debrief, the same way he controlled mine 6 years ago. Get to the story first. Frame it. Decide who's credible and who's a problem before anyone with authority hears a word." Her voice went flat and certain. "I was the problem last time, sir. I'm not going to be the problem this time. This time I'm going to be the witness." And she was right about all of it, which she learned 20 minutes later, when a staff officer she'd never seen found her in the corridor and told her with the practiced blandness of a man delivering bad news. He'd been ordered to make sound like good news, that her debrief had been scheduled, that it would be conducted by a review officer flying in specially to handle the incident, and that until then, she was to consider herself confined to quarters and was not to discuss the events of the operation with anyone. "Who's the review officer?" Maya asked. "That's above my level, Sergeant." "Humor me." The staff officer hesitated, and the hesitation told her everything before his mouth did. "The incident's being handled at the colonel level given the sensitivity. A Colonel Voss is coordinating the review." There it was. Maya felt the old cold move through her, the specific cold of a system closing its hand, the cold she'd felt 6 years ago across a table while a man stamped her file. But she was not the same woman who'd stood on the wrong side of that table. That woman had believed that the truth would speak for itself, that if she just did the right thing, the system would eventually see it. She'd learned better. She'd learned that the truth doesn't speak for itself, that somebody has to speak for it loudly in front of the right people before the wrong people can lock the door. "Thank you," she said to the staff officer with a calm that should have frightened him more than it did. "You can tell whoever sent you that I received the message." She went to her quarters. She did not stay in them. The first thing she did was find Diaz. He was in the team's ready room, still in his gear, still coming down off the mountain, The way you come down off a thing like that, slow and shaky. And when Maya walked in, he stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Carter, they said you were confined to quarters. They said we weren't supposed to. They said a lot of things. She closed the door. Diaz, the review officer flying in to handle our debrief, is Colonel Raymond Voss. Diaz went still. He hadn't been on the net for the whole exchange about the countersign, but he'd heard enough on the bird in the long, cold ride back from Ramsey and Pruitt, filling in the pieces. He knew the name now. Everyone on that team knew the name now. The guy who sold us, Diaz said. The guy I believe sold us. Belief isn't proof, and Voss knows that better than anyone, which is why he's going to run this review. Because a man who controls the review controls what counts as proof. She stepped closer. So I need to know something, and I need you to tell me the truth because a lot is about to depend on it. On the mountain, what you saw, the shots I took, the dead rifle firing, the way I held the slope. Are you willing to say it in a room on the record? Even if the man asking the questions is a colonel who very much does not want to hear it. Diaz didn't answer right away, and Maya respected him for it because a fast yes would have been a lie, and she'd had enough of lies. He was weighing it. He was a young operator with a career ahead of him, and a colonel's displeasure was the kind of thing that ended careers, and he knew it, and he sat with it. On the mountain, Diaz said finally, you took a shot with a dead rifle that should have taken your hand off, so a burst transmission could go out, so a kid I've never met could keep breathing. You didn't have to pick up that first rifle at all. You could have stayed the medic. Nobody would have blamed you. Nobody would have even known there was a shot to take. He looked at her. I spent the whole night watching you choose the hard thing every single time it would have been easier to disappear. So yeah, Carter, I'll say it, in a room, on the record, in front of Gusht and Voss and anybody else. I'll say every word of it. Maya let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Then we've got a chance. We've got Ramsey too, Diaz said. And Pruitt and Hendricks and the gun camera off the aircraft and the timestamp on Pruitt's transmission. Carter, this isn't 6 years ago. You're not one voice against a colonel's paperwork. There's a whole team of us in a whole aircraft full of recorded truth. He can't bury all of it. He doesn't have to bury all of it, Maya said quietly. And this was the thing she understood that the young operator didn't yet. That's the mistake I made 6 years ago. I thought I had to be proven a liar to be buried. I didn't. I just had to be made complicated. Voss doesn't need to prove I didn't stop the convoy. He just needs to muddy why. He'll say I disobeyed my role. He'll say a medic taking a rifle is a discipline problem, not a hero story. He'll say the mission was compromised by chaos and my unauthorized actions were part of that chaos. He'll take everything true about the mountain and reframe it as a mess that a steady hand his hand had to clean up. And if he does it fast enough, if he gets to the narrative before anyone with stars hears our version, then the recorded truth stops being evidence of a hero and starts being evidence of an incident. And incidents get people quietly reassigned. She held his eyes. I've been quietly reassigned before Diaz. I know exactly how it's done. The door opened. It was Ramsey and behind him Pruitt, and the look on both their faces said they'd already heard. Voss lands in 90 minutes, Ramsey said. Word's going around. And Carter, there's more. The staff's already circulating a preliminary summary of the operation. Somebody wrote it fast before any of us gave a statement, and he shook his head. It's exactly what you just said. It calls it a compromised reconnaissance operation with significant equipment and communication failures salvaged through the coordination of the reviewing colonel's element. It doesn't have your name in it, Carter. Not once. It mentions a designated marksman engaging the convoy. It doesn't say who. It doesn't say medic. It's writing you out of it in real time, same as before. And there it was again. The erasure, happening live in a warm room while she stood in her frozen gear with a boy's blood on her sleeves. The system reaching for its eraser before the ink of the truth was even drifting. For one moment standing there, Maya felt the full weight of how tired she was and how much easier it would be to let it happen. She'd already won the thing that mattered. Brooks was alive. The convoy was stopped. The men on the mountain knew what she'd done, and their knowing was real and would not go away even if the paperwork never said her name. She could take that. She could take the private truth and let the public record lie and go back to being the medic and live. She'd done it before. She knew how. And that was exactly why she couldn't do it again. No, she said, not loud, but something in the single syllable made all three men look at her. 6 years ago, I let them do this to me because I thought being right in private was enough. I thought I could carry the truth by myself, and that would be a kind of dignity. It wasn't. It was just a way of agreeing to disappear politely. She looked at the three of them, at Ramsey, who'd trusted her with a broken rifle at Diaz, who'd spotted for her in the snow at Pruitt, who'd kept them alive with 6 seconds of transmission. But this time it isn't just my name they're erasing. It's yours too. It's the whole mountain, and I am done being polite about disappearing. What do you want to do with their blood? Ramsey said. Maya thought about it, and the answer when it came had the same shape as every decision she'd made on the mountain. The decision to do the hard thing before it got easier to do nothing. Voss's whole play depends on getting to the people with authority first, she said, on controlling the narrative before it reaches anyone who can act on it. So we don't let him get there first. We get there first, not with a complaint, not with a she said, he said, with the one thing he can't reframe. She turned to Pruitt. The burst transmission you sent from the mountain, the real one that reached the strike element, it went out on a frequency and at a timestamp that are both recorded. And the countersign that came back the first time, the fake acknowledgement from Voss's people, the one with the 1 cycle lag, that's recorded too, isn't it? It has to be. Comms discipline logs everything. Pruitt's eyes widened slowly. Everything I sent and everything I received is logged, yeah, time-stamped, frequency stamped. It's all in the comms record. And then he got there the same place Maya had already gotten to. The fake acknowledgement. If it's in the record, then there's a log transmission on our secure frequency sent by someone who wasn't the real strike element using a countersign that expired 1 cycle earlier. That's not a story. That's not a he said. That's a logged, time-stamped, recorded transmission from someone who had our comms plan and used it to try to fix our position for the enemy. And a comms plan, Maya said, has a distribution list, a record of exactly who had access to it, who could have handed it to the enemy. That list is going to be short, and Voss's name is going to be on it because a colonel coordinating a review of an operation had to have had access to the operation. He can reframe what I did on the mountain all day long. He can call me a discipline problem and write me out of the summary and quietly reassign me for the rest of my life. But he cannot reframe a log transmission with an expired countersign sent to the enemy on a comms plan that only a handful of people had. That's not my word against his. That's the machine's own record against him. And the machine doesn't care what rank he is. The room was very quiet. That's why he buried me 6 years ago, Maya said, and her voice had gone soft with the weight of finally understanding it all the way down. Not because I embarrassed him on a range, because I was the kind of person who reads the comms logs, who notices the 1 cycle lag, who pays attention to the parts of an operation that everyone above her assumes no one below her is smart enough to check. I noticed his signature once 6 years ago in a report I wasn't supposed to see, and I didn't even understand what I was looking at yet, but he understood that I might figure it out. So he made me disappear before I could. He didn't bury a shooter. He buried a witness who hadn't finished becoming one. She looked up, and now tonight on a mountain, he sold the witness he buried, heard his signature again. And this time I know exactly what I'm looking at. Ramsey exhaled slowly. So we get the comms log. We get the comms log, we get the distribution list for the mission's communications plan, and we get all of it in front of an authority who is not Colonel Voss before Voss's review ever convenes. Maya's mind was moving fast now, clean and cold, the same place it went behind a rifle. Hendricks, where is he? With command, Pruitt said, giving his initial account. He's the ranking man from the mountain. They had to take a statement first. Then that's our lever. Maya was already moving toward the door. Hendricks is a lieutenant commander who just watched his element get sold and nearly killed. He's got standing, he's got credibility, and he's got no reason on earth to protect Voss and every reason to burn him down. If we put the comms record in Hendricks's hands and Hendricks carries it up the chain to someone with the authority to freeze Voss's review, then Voss loses the one thing his whole play depends on. He loses the ability to get there first. She stopped at the door and looked back at the three of them, and for just a moment, the exhaustion showed through and under it. Something else, something that had been buried for 6 years and was clawing its way back into the light. I need you to understand what I'm asking, she said. The last time I tried to expose this man, I was alone, and he made me disappear so completely that most of the Army genuinely believes I've been nothing but a medic my whole career. If we do this and it works, we take down a colonel, and that is not a small thing, and there will be people who never forgive any of us for it. And if we do this and it fails, if Voss is faster or better connected than I think, then he doesn't just bury me again. He buries all of you with me. She held their eyes. So I'm not going to order anyone. I don't have the rank to, and I wouldn't use it if I did. I'm going to ask. Will you help me put the truth in front of someone who can act on it before the man who sold us puts his version there first? Diaz didn't hesitate this time. You held the mountain so Pruitt could send 6 seconds. I think we can hold a hallway so you can send the truth. I logged it, Pruitt said. I'm the one who logged all of it. If anyone's carrying that record into a room, it should be me. It's mine to carry. Ramsey was the last to speak, and he spoke like a man who understood exactly what he was signing up for, which made it mean the most. I've been in this army 22 years, Ramsey said. I've watched a lot of good people get quietly disappeared by men in warm rooms, and every time I told myself it wasn't my fight, and I went back to my rack and I slept fine. He looked at Maya. I'm not going to sleep fine after this mountain. I watched you fix a dead rifle with a medic's kit and hold 40 men off a ridge and pull a kid back from the edge with your bare hands, and then I watched the paperwork start writing you out of it before the blood was even dry. So no, not this time. This time it's my fight too. He stood. Let's go find Hendricks. Oh, and Maya Carter, the medic, they forgot the shooter. They buried the witness. They thought they did erased, opened the door of the ready room and walked out into the corridor with 3 men behind her who were no longer willing to watch her disappear toward a lieutenant commander who could carry the truth up the chain toward a comms log that couldn't be reframed toward a reckoning 6 years in the making, and toward a colonel who was at that very moment 90 minutes out and closing, still believing that the ghost he'd buried on paper would stay buried when he landed. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. They found Hendricks in the corridor outside command, and the moment he saw the 4 of them coming, all 4 still in their frozen gear moving with the tight purpose of a team that had decided something together, he stepped away from the officer he'd been speaking with and met them halfway. They confined you to quarters, he said to Maya. They did. And here you are. Here I am, sir. She stopped in front of him. Voss is the reviewing officer. He lands in under 90 minutes. There's already a summary circulating that writes me out of the operation and credits his element with cleaning up the mess. And Pruitt has a comms log with a logged timestamp transmission from someone using our expired countersign to try to fix our position for the enemy, sent on a comms plan that only a handful of people had access to, and one of those people was Colonel Voss. She let it land. I know how this ends if we do nothing, sir. I've lived it. So I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look at the record, and if the record says what I think it says, to carry it to someone with the authority to stop Voss's review before it starts. Because the only way he wins is if he gets to the people who matter before the truth does. Hendricks looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Pruitt, at the comms log, at Ramsey and Diaz, standing behind her, and Maya watched him do the same math she'd done, weighing the cost of what she was asking against the cost of doing nothing. You understand, Hendricks said slowly, that if I take this up the chain and I'm wrong, if that log doesn't say what you think it says, it's not just your career. It's mine. A lieutenant commander accusing a colonel of treason had better be holding something that can't be waved away. It can't be waved away, sir, Pruitt said. It's the machine's own record. Frequency timestamp, the expired countersign, all of it logged automatically. Nobody wrote it. Nobody can unwrite it. It's just true. Hendricks was quiet for one more second, and then something settled in his face, the same thing that had settled there on the mountain when he'd said, "Give her the rifle." The look of a man deciding to do the hard right thing instead of the easy safe one. On that ridge, Hendricks said, I handed a rifle to a medic. Everyone told me couldn't make the shot, and she stopped a convoy and held a mountain and gave me back my whole team alive. He reached out and took the comms log from Pruitt's hands. I'm not going to be the man who watched her do all that and then let a colonel write her out of it in a warm room. Show me the record, and then let's go ruin Colonel Voss's morning. Maya Carter allowed herself for the first time since the mountain something that was almost a smile. The ghost was done disappearing, and this time she had witnesses. The record said exactly what Pruitt promised it would. They found an empty briefing room down the corridor, and Pruitt pulled up the comms log on a secure terminal, and the four of them and Hendricks stood around the screen while the machine's own memory of the night scrolled up in cold, unarguable lines. There was Pruitt's first burst transmission, the one he'd punched through the gap in the jamming timestamp to the second. And there, 41 seconds later, was the acknowledgement that had come back on the strike element's frequency with the strike element's call sign, and Pruitt tapped the line and expanded it. And there it was, the countersign, one full cycle expired. "That's it," Pruitt said quietly. "That's the fake, right there. Somebody on our secure net using our call sign with a countersign that had already rolled over. The real strike element would never have sent an expired countersign. Only someone working from an old copy of the comms plan would. Someone who had the plan but wasn't in the live loop that night. Someone who got the plan in advance," Maya said, "and handed it off and didn't stay current because they were never actually supposed to be on that net. They were supposed to be somewhere warm coordinating." She stared at the expired countersign the way she'd stared at the drifting scope on the mountain, reading the truth underneath the lie. "You said comms discipline logs everything, Pruitt. Does it log the plan's distribution?" "Different system, but yeah. The communications plan for any operation has a distribution list. Access is controlled and logged. Who received it, when, what version?" Pruitt's fingers moved across the terminal. "It's going to be classified above what I can pull from here, but the fact that it exists and that it names everyone who could have leaked that expired countersign, that's the whole game. All command has to do is pull that list and cross it against who was actually on the live net. Whoever's on the distribution list but wasn't in the live loop, that's a very short list. And I would bet everything I own that there's exactly one kernel on it." Hendricks studied the screen with the stillness of a man memorizing something he'd have to defend with his career. "Walk me through it one more time," he said, slowly, "because when I carry this into command, they are going to ask me to explain it in words a general can follow in 30 seconds, and I need to be able to do that without a single gap for Voss to slip through." Maya took it because she'd been building the explanation in her head since the mountain. "It's 3 facts, sir. Fact 1. At this timestamp, Petty Officer Pruitt sent a genuine distress transmission that reached the real strike element, and that's why the aircraft came, and the aircraft's own gun camera confirms it arrived and engaged. That fact makes Pruitt credible. Fact 2. 41 seconds before that, someone else answered on our secure frequency using our call sign and an expired countersign trying to get Pruitt to confirm our position. That someone was not the real strike element because the real strike element never got the first earlier transmission. Pruitt tried the one that got jammed. So there's a phantom on our net who knew our frequency and our call sign but was working from an old comms plan. Fact 3. The comms plan's distribution list names everyone who had that old plan. Cross it against who was actually in the live net that night. And the phantom is whoever's on the list but wasn't in the loop." She looked up. 3 facts, sir. No opinions, no medic taking a rifle, nothing Voss can call a discipline problem. Just 3 logged facts that point at exactly one person, and that person isn't me, and it isn't anyone on this mountain. It's whoever sold us. And I believe the list is going to say it was him. Hendricks was silent for a moment, and then he nodded once, the nod of a man who'd found the shape of the thing he could carry. 3 facts, he said. I can carry 3 facts. There's a 4th, Maya said, but it's mine to carry, not yours, and it only matters after the first 3 land. She hesitated because this was the part that reached back 6 years, the part that was personal, the part that a colonel could most easily call a grudge. The expired countersign has a specific signature, a 1-cycle lag in the way it's generated. I've seen that exact lag before, sir. 6 years ago, in an after-action report I wasn't cleared to read on Colonel Voss's desk. It's a habit of his, a lazy shortcut in how he handles secure comms that he never fixed because he never believed that anyone below him was paying attention. I noticed it then. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but he understood that I'd seen it, and that's the real reason he buried me. She met Hendricks's eyes. I can't prove the 4th fact the way we can prove the first 3. It's my word about something I saw 6 years ago. But once the distribution list points at him, the 4th fact stops being a grudge and starts being the reason he had to get rid of me before I ever became a threat. It's motive. And motive is what turns 3 cold facts into a story a general remembers. Diaz let out a low breath. So he didn't bury a shooter to protect his ego. He buried a witness to protect his freedom. He buried a witness who hadn't finished becoming one, Maya said. I was one report away from understanding what I'd seen, and he knew it, and he moved first. He took my qualification, he made me a medic, he made me small and quiet and easy to overlook, and it worked. For 6 years it worked. Nobody looks twice at a medic. Nobody wonders whether the corpsman patching them up used to read comms logs for fun. He turned me into the last person anyone would suspect of being dangerous. A hard light came into her eyes. And then the Army, in all its infinite wisdom, put me on a mountain with a dead anti-material rifle and a convoy nobody else could stop. And the man he'd made small picked up a rifle and became dangerous again. He spent 6 years making sure I could never expose him. And the one thing he couldn't control was whether I'd survive the night he sold. The room sat with that. Ramsey, 22 years in, shook his head slowly the way a man does when he realizes the depth of something. He sold this operation, Ramsey said, and then he volunteered to review it. He put himself in charge of investigating his own crime. Because that's how it's done, Maya said. That's how it's always done. You don't get away with selling missions by hiding from the investigation. You get away with it by running the investigation. You get there first. You decide what the story is. You decide who's credible and who's complicated. 6 years ago, I was complicated, and he decided that, and I disappeared. She looked around the room at the 4 men who'd come with her. The only reason it's different this time is that I'm not alone in the room. Last time it was my word against his paperwork. This time it's a comms log, a gun camera, a distribution list, a lieutenant commander, a chief with 22 years and 2 operators who watch the whole thing with their own eyes. He can reframe one voice. He cannot reframe all of us and the machine's own record at the same time. Hendricks straightened, and the decision was fully made in him. Now Maya could see it, the same clean commitment he'd shown when he called her Iron Wolf on the ridge. Then we don't give him the chance to get there first, he said. Pruitt locked that comms record so it can't be altered or purged, and flag it for command retention right now this minute before anyone with an interest in it being lost has a chance to make it disappear. Ramsey, you're 22 years, and a face command trusts you come with me to vouch for the chain of what happened on that mountain. Diaz, you stay with Pruitt and that terminal, and you do not leave it unattended for 1 second because a record that can't be reframed can still be deleted if nobody's watching it. He turned to Maya last. And you, sir, you've been confined to quarters by an order that traces back one way or another to the man we're about to expose. If I bring you into command right now before this lands, Voss's people can point at that and call the whole thing a confined soldier making wild accusations to get out of trouble. So I need you to do the hardest thing I've asked you to do all night. He held her eyes. I need you to wait, in your quarters, for exactly as long as it takes me to put 3 facts in front of someone with the stars. And then I'm going to come get you myself, and you're going to walk into that room not as a confined medic, not as a discipline problem, but as the witness who cracked it open. Can you do that? Can you wait? And Maya Carter, who had waited 6 years, who had learned to make herself furniture with a pulse, who had swallowed 1,000 small silences one at a time, looked at the lieutenant commander, asking her to wait just a little longer, and understood the difference between his waiting and all the waiting that came before. 6 years ago, she said, waiting meant disappearing. I waited, and I got smaller and smaller until there was nothing left but a name in a file nobody read. She picked up her frozen gear from where she'd set it and slung it over her shoulder. This is the first time in 6 years that waiting means something's coming. So yeah, sir, I can wait. A ghost of that almost smile again. Just don't make me wait long. I've got a colonel to meet, and I don't want to be late for the one appointment I've been trying to keep for 6 years. Hendricks almost smiled back. 90 minutes, Iron Wolf, maybe less. Go. She went, and as she walked back down the corridor toward the quarters she'd been confined to past the operating room, where Ethan Brooks was fighting his own quiet battle to stay in the world past the staff officers who had no idea that the small, quiet medic passing them was about to end a colonel's career, Maya Carter felt something she hadn't felt in 6 years, something she'd almost forgotten the shape of. She felt like herself again. Not the medic they'd made her, not the shooter they'd buried, not the ghost, not the shadow, not the name in a forgotten file. Just herself whole, both halves at once, the hands that saved lives and the eye that never missed walking down a corridor toward the reckoning she'd earned on a frozen mountain with a dead rifle and a boy's blood, blood on her sleeves. The waiting ahead of her was the last waiting. She could feel it. Somewhere in a room with stars on the wall, a lieutenant commander was about to lay down 3 facts that couldn't be reframed. Somewhere 90 minutes out, a colonel was descending through the gray Alaskan dawn, still believing the ghost stayed buried. And somewhere inside her, the witness he tried to erase 6 years too early sat down to wait one last time, calm and certain, and finally ready. The knock on her door came in 71 minutes, not 90. And when Maya opened it, Hendricks was standing there in a fresh uniform with an expression she'd never seen on him before. And it took her a second to place it because she'd never had reason to see Hendricks look satisfied. "They pulled the distribution list," he said. "You were right. There's one name on it that had the comms plan and was never on the live net that night. One colonel who received the full operational package 48 hours in advance, and then according to the record was nowhere near the operation while it was happening, right up until the moment an expired countersign went out over our secure frequency, trying to fix our position for the enemy." He let it sit. Command froze his review before he ever landed. He doesn't know yet. He's about to walk off that aircraft thinking he's here to bury an incident, and instead there's a 2-star general in a room full of people waiting for him with 3 facts and a comms log. He paused. "And they want the witness in the room. Get your gear, not the frozen stuff. Your uniform. It's time." Maya was already reaching for it. Her hands were steady the way they'd been steady on the mountain, the way they'd been steady inside a dying boy's wound, the way they'd been steady on a broken rifle that should have taken her hand off. 6 years of waiting had taught her that the body betrays you when the moment finally comes, that the hands shake and the voice wavers right when you need them most. But hers didn't, because she'd already had her moment on the mountain. This room was just where the record got corrected. "How's Brooks?" she asked, pulling the uniform straight. "Out of surgery, stable." The surgeon said the only reason there was anything left to operate on was the field care. Hendricks watched her. He said whoever packed that wound and held that body heat on the mountain kept a dead man breathing long enough to become a live one. I told him it was a medic. He said it was the best field work he'd seen in 15 years. A beat. "I didn't tell him the medic also stopped a convoy and held a ridge. I figured that was your line to deliver." Maya almost laughed. It came out as a breath. "I'll save it for the reunion. Brooks says I'm going to be one of those guys who tells the story until everybody's sick of it." She squared her shoulders. "Let's go correct a record, sir." They walked the corridor together, and Maya noticed the thing she'd noticed her whole career, the way people's eyes slid off a medic, the way a uniform without a shooter's badge made you invisible. Except now, the eyes didn't slide. Word had moved through the base the way word does, faster than any order, and the people they passed looked at her. Really looked, and Maya understood that somewhere in the last 71 minutes, she had stopped being furniture with a pulse. She had become the thing the base was whispering about. The medic who stopped the convoy. The ghost who came back. She didn't love it. 6 years of being invisible had made visibility feel like standing in a doorway with the wind at your back. But she'd chosen this. She'd chosen it on the mountain when she asked for the range, and again in the ready room when she said she was done being polite about disappearing, and she wasn't going to flinch from it, now just because it had eyes. The room when they reached it was exactly the kind of room she'd braced for 6 years ago and never gotten. A long table, officers with weight on their shoulders, a 2-star general at the head of it with the still unhurried face of a man who had heard every excuse the Army could manufacture and believed none of them on principle. Ramsey was already there, and Pruitt and Diaz, and the comms log was up on a screen where everyone could see it, 3 facts glowing in cold light. And there was an empty chair, and the general looked at Maya and gestured to it and said, "Staff Sergeant Carter, sit. We've been hearing about you." "Good things, sir, I hope," Maya said, sitting. "Interesting things," the general said, which was not the same, and Maya respected him for the precision. "We'll get to yours, but we're going to wait because the man whose operation this was is about to join us, and I want you in the room when he does. I want to watch his face when he sees who's sitting at this table." The general's eyes were very steady. "You understand what I'm telling you, Sergeant. You understand who's about to walk through that door." "I understand exactly who it is, sir." Maya said. I've been waiting 6 years to be in a room with him and the truth at the same time. The general studied her for a moment longer, and something moved behind his eyes, something that might have been the beginning of belief. Then wait a little longer, he said. He's 90 seconds out. The 90 seconds were the longest of the whole night, longer than the 20 on the mountain when the convoy crawled toward the crossing, longer than the 60 when she'd brought a dead rifle back to life. Because on the mountain, the enemy had been simple. The enemy on the mountain wanted to kill her, and there was a clean honesty in that. The man about to walk through the door had done something worse than try to kill her. He tried to make her never have existed, and there is no clean honesty in that, only a cold that 6 years hadn't thawed. The door opened. Colonel Raymond Voss walked in, the way he'd always walked, like a man entering a room. He already owned a folder under his arm, his review face already on the practiced expression of an officer arriving to manage a mess. He was mid-sentence before he had fully cleared the door. Something about the operational summary and the equipment failures and the coordination required to salvage the situation, the same story Ramsey had described already flowing out of him smooth as water because he'd told versions of it 100 times. And then he saw the table. Maya watched it happen. She'd waited 6 years for it, and she was not going to miss a single frame of it. She watched Voss's eyes move across the room, cataloging the way a man like him always catalogs, and she watched him register the general and the comms log on the screen, and Hendricks standing with his arms folded, and Ramsey with his 22 years, and the two young operators, and then last sitting at the table where a discipline problem had no business sitting, wearing a uniform he thought he'd stripped of any teeth 6 years ago. She watched him register her. And Colonel Raymond Voss stopped mid-sentence. It was small. He recovered fast, faster than most men would have, because he'd spent a career recovering from small exposures. But Maya saw it. Everyone in the room saw it. The half-second where the smooth water snagged on a rock, where the review face slipped, and something underneath it looked out, and what looked out was not confusion. Confusion would have been innocent. What looked out of Colonel Voss's eyes in that half-second was recognition and calculation, and underneath both of those, fast and cold and unmistakable, was fear. Sergeant Carter, Voss said, and his voice was almost even. Almost. I wasn't aware you were attached to this operation. No, sir, Maya said. You wouldn't have been. That was rather the point of where you put me. The general's eyes moved between them, and Maya knew he'd caught it, the history in it, the 6 years compressed into 2 sentences. Colonel, the general said, sit down. Your review's been reassigned. You're not here to run anything today. You're here to answer some questions about a comms log. Voss did not sit down. That was the first mistake. And Maya, who had spent her whole life reading the small tells that officers above her assumed no one below them could see, watched him make it and understood what it meant. A man with nothing to fear sits down. A man calculating an exit stays on his feet. With respect, General Voss said, I flew in specifically to conduct this review, and I'd want to understand the basis for reassigning it before. The basis, the general said, is on the screen behind me. Petty Officer Pruitt walked the colonel through it, and Pruitt did. He was young and he'd been terrified on the mountain, and Maya had watched him nearly come apart under the jamming. But he stood up in that room and he walked a 2-star general and a line colonel through 3 facts with the flat steadiness of a man reading coordinates, because he'd logged every one of them himself, and they were his to carry. The genuine transmission that reached the strike element. The phantom acknowledgement 41 seconds earlier on their frequency with their call sign and the expired countersign. And the distributions list for the comms plan with one name on it that had the plan in advance and was nowhere near the live net. One name, Colonel Pruitt finished, and he looked at Voss and his voice didn't shake. Yours. The room was very quiet. That's circumstantial, Voss said, and he said it too fast. I received the operational package as a matter of routine oversight. Half the command receives those packages. The fact that I wasn't on the live net proves nothing except that I wasn't operationally involved, which is exactly what you'd expect of an oversight role. You have a coincidence and you're dressing it as a conspiracy. He turned to the general and Maya watched him reach for the old move, the reframe, the making it complicated. General, I've seen this before. An operation goes wrong, equipment fails, communications fail, people are frightened and looking for someone to blame, and the nearest senior officer becomes a convenient target. I'd caution against building a case on the word of. And here his eyes moved to Maya, and Maya saw him decide to do it. saw him reach for the weapon that had worked 6 years ago. On the word of a soldier with a documented history of insubordination and a personal grievance against me. There it was. 6 years ago, that sentence would have ended her. 6 years ago, that exact reframe, the discipline problem, the personal grievance, the convenient target had slid her file across a table and made her disappear. And for 1/2 second sitting in that room, Maya felt the old gravity of it, the pull of the story that had swallowed her once the way it reached for her again. And then she felt something else. And the something else was the 4 people in that room who had come with her and the machine's own record glowing on the screen, and a boy breathing in a recovery ward who was alive because of her hands. And she understood all the way down that the sentence that had ended her 6 years ago had no power in this room. Because 6 years ago, she'd been one voice. And Colonel Voss, brilliant at reading a room, had made the one mistake a man like him could make. He'd reached for the old weapon without checking whether the room had changed. "Colonel," Maya said, and her voice was calm and it carried. "You're right that I have a grievance against you. I'm not going to pretend I don't. You took my qualification and you buried my file, and you spent 6 years making sure I was the last person anyone would believe. So yes, I have a grievance. Let's put it on the table right next to the comms log, and let's let the general decide which one of them is doing the talking." She leaned forward. "Because here's the thing about my grievance, sir. It doesn't explain the expired countersign. It doesn't explain how someone with your comms plan tried to fix our position for the enemy. It doesn't explain the distribution list. My grievance is a feeling. What's on that screen is a record. And you can call me a discipline problem all day long, the way you did 6 years ago, but you cannot make a 2-star general see a log transmission." She held his eyes. "You taught me that, actually, 6 years ago. You taught me that the system doesn't care what's true, it cares what's documented. So I documented it. All of it. And now the thing you used to bury me is the thing that's going to bury you." Voss's face did something then, and it was the thing Maya had waited 6 years to see. The smooth water broke completely, and what was underneath came all the way to the surface, and it wasn't the confident officer who'd slid her file across a table. It was a cornered man doing math that no longer worked. "General," Voss said, and there was an edge in it now. The edge of a man feeling the floor tilt. "I don't know what this soldier has told you, but 6 years ago she made an unauthorized battlefield decision that endangered a mission, and I made the correct and difficult call to remove her from a role she wasn't fit for, and now she's using this incident to relitigate that decision and settle a personal—" "The unauthorized decision 6 years ago," the general interrupted, and his voice was very quiet, which was worse than loud, "saved 6 soldiers from a kill zone. I read the actual after-action report on the flight up here, Coronel. Not the summary, the report. It's remarkable what's in a report when you read the whole thing instead of the version someone wrote to close a file." He let that land and Maya watched Voss go still. "Sergeant Carter made a call that saved a squad, and then her qualification disappeared. And I've been sitting here for the last hour wondering why a shooter that good gets buried for saving lives, and now I'm looking at a comms log that suggests maybe it wasn't about the shooting at all. Maybe it was about what she might have noticed if you'd left her where she could keep noticing things." The room had gone so quiet Maya could hear the terminal humming. "That's a serious accusation, General," Voss said, and his voice had dropped the confidence, draining out of it word by word. "It is," the general agreed. "That's why we are going to investigate it thoroughly with the full record with every person who was on that mountain, and with a comms log that's already been locked and flagged for retention, so that nothing about it can quietly disappear the way certain qualifications have a way of doing." He looked at Voss with the flat, patient certainty of a man who had already made up his mind and was only observing the formalities. "You're relieved, Colonel. Effective now. You'll surrender your access and you'll remain on this base pending the investigation. And Colonel," the general paused, "the next time you try to bury someone for noticing things, you might want to make sure you actually bury them. Because it turns out this one was only sleeping." Maya watched them take Colonel Raymond Voss out of the room. He didn't fight it. Men like Voss never fight it at the end, because fighting it means admitting there's something to fight, and the last card a man like that holds is his dignity, and he plays it by walking out straight. But at the door he stopped, and he turned, and he looked at Maya one last time, and Maya looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, because Everything had already been said 6 years ago and again just now, and there was nothing left in the space between them but the record glowing on a screen telling a truth that no amount of paperwork could reframe. And then he was gone. The room let out a breath it had been holding. The general sat back, and Maya Carter sat in a chair she'd had no business sitting in 6 years ago, in a room that had finally hurt her and felt the 6 years lift off her chest, one silence at a time, in reverse until she could breathe all the way to the bottom of her lungs for the first time since a man had slid her file across a table and told a review board she belonged in a body bag detail. "Sergeant Carter," the general said, "in about a week there are going to be a lot of people in this building who want to give you things. Your qualification back. Commendations. Probably a medal or two once the paperwork catches up with what you did on that mountain." He studied her. "I've been doing this a long time, so let me ask you the question. The medals never ask. After 6 years of this, after being erased and rebuilt into someone smaller, after all of it, do you even want it back? The rifle, the recognition, the thing he took?" And Maya thought about it because the general had earned a real answer, and because it was the same question Ethan Brooks had asked her on the mountain. Whispered through a dressing, "Ask me when we're off the mountain," and she'd promised him a real answer, and now she was off the mountain, and it was time to know. "For 6 years, she said slowly, I told myself I didn't want it, that I'd made peace with being the medic, that saving people was enough, and the rifle was just a thing they took like keys to a car I didn't need anymore." She turned the truth over in her hands the way she'd turned the broken rifle looking for the honest seam. "But on that mountain, the second the stock touched my shoulder, 6 years fell off me like it was nothing. And I understood that I hadn't made peace with anything. I'd just gotten very good at not looking at the wound. So do I want it back? The qualification, the badge, the recognition?" She shook her head slowly, and this surprised even her hearing herself say it. "Not for the reason you'd think, sir. Not because I need the Army to tell me who I am. He taught me the hard way that a file is just a file and a rank is just a rank and an opinion. Even a colonel's is just an opinion. The most dangerous person on that mountain wasn't the one with the qualification. It was the one everybody stopped seeing." She met the general's eyes. "I want it back because there's another Maya Carter out there right now, somewhere in this army being made small by someone who's afraid of what she might notice. And if I take it back, if I stand up and let the whole building watch me take back the thing they buried, then the next person who gets buried has a reason to believe they can come back too. That's why I want it. Not for me. I already know what I am. I want it so the ones still sleeping know they're allowed to wake up." The general was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly, the nod of a man who had asked a question, expecting an excuse, and gotten something else entirely. "Ramsey warned me you'd say something like that," he said. "He said you spent the whole mountain refusing to let anyone stay small, including yourself." He stood and the room stood with him, and he looked at Maya Carter one last time. "Get some rest, Sergeant. You've earned it. And when you're ready, come see me. I've got a feeling the Army's been wasting you in more places than one." They gave it all back in the end. The weeks that followed unspooled the way Maya had told the general they would. Her qualification was restored quietly at first, and then, when the investigation into Voss opened all the way up, and the whole rotten shape of it came into the light not quietly at all, the commendations came. The medal came eventually, the one for the mountain. Though Maya would tell anyone who asked that the field dressing meant more to her than the shooting, because the shooting stopped a convoy, but the dressing kept a boy breathing, and she'd take a live Ethan Brooks over a stopped vehicle any day of the week. And Ethan Brooks lived. He walked out of that hospital on his own 2 feet slower than he went in with a scar he'd show anybody who stood still long enough. And the first thing he did when he found Maya was ask her the question she'd owed him since the mountain. "You never answered me," he said. "Up there, I asked if you were glad you got it back. The rifle, you said ask you when we were off the mountain." He grinned that same young grin, gray no longer in his face. "We're pretty far off the mountain now, Carter. So are you." And Maya Carter, who had been the shooter they buried and the medic they forgot, who had picked up a dead rifle and become a ghost again, who had walked into a warm room and refused to disappear a second time, looked at the boy she'd kept alive with her bare hands and gave him the real answer she'd promised. "I'm glad I never lost it," she said. "That's the truth, Brooks. They can take the rifle and the badge and the name right out of the file. They can make you small and quiet and easy to overlook. They can make a whole army forget you ever existed. She put her hand on his shoulder, the same steady hand that had held his wound together on a frozen ridge. But they can't take what you are. That was mine the whole time, buried under 6 years of their paperwork waiting. And the day they needed it, it was still there, exactly where I left it. She smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes, the first time it had done that in 6 years. So no, I'm not glad I got it back, because I never lost it. And neither will you. Nobody who's real ever really disappears. They just wait for the day the world remembers to look. And on that mountain, on that base, in an army that had tried once to erase her and would never manage it again, that was the truth Maya Carter carried for the rest of her days. And it was the truth that outlived every file, every rank, and every man who ever thought a person could be forgotten just because he stopped looking at her. The ghost had come back, and the ghost was never going away again. 6 months later, the Army did something it almost never does. It admitted in writing that it had been wrong. The letter came to Maya Carter on a Tuesday, plain and official, and she read it twice, standing in the doorway of her quarters before she let herself believe it. The investigation into Colonel Raymond Voss had closed. What it found underneath him was worse than anyone on that mountain had imagined, because Voss had not sold one operation. He had sold several over years, small pieces at a time, missions gone expensively wrong in specific ways, each one buried under a summary he'd written himself. Each inconvenient witness quietly reassigned the way Maya had been reassigned. The mountain had been the one that finally caught him, and the reason it caught him was a medic who read comms logs and remembered a one-cycle lag from 6 years back. The letter did not say all of that in those words, but it said enough. It said the United States Army acknowledged that Staff Sergeant Maya Carter had been removed from her role improperly, that her record had been falsified to protect a senior officer, and that the Army regretted the 6 years it had cost her. Maya folded the letter and set it on her small desk and sat down and did not feel the triumph she'd expected. She felt something quieter and stranger. She felt seen, and after 6 years of being furniture, with a pulse, being seen was a sensation she was still learning how to hold without flinching. There was a knock. It was Ramsey out of uniform, which she'd almost never seen, holding 2 cups of coffee like a man on a mission. "You read it?" he said, looking at the letter on the desk. "I read it. 22 years I've been in this army," Ramsey said, handing her a cup and sitting down uninvited, which was very like him. 22 years, and I have never once seen it put in writing that they got it wrong. They'll give you a medal to say sorry. They'll retire a man to make a problem go away, but they don't write it down. Writing it down means it's real. He looked at her over his coffee. "You made them write it down, Carter. You understand how rare that is. You didn't just come back. You made the machine admit it broke you on purpose. Nobody does that." "I had help," Maya said. "You, Diaz, Pruitt, Hendricks. Pruitt's comms log did more than I ever could have." "Pruitt's comms log was a rifle," Ramsey said. "You were the one who knew where to point it." He set the coffee down. "That's the whole thing about you, and I've thought about it a lot these 6 months. You don't win with more. You never have more. On that mountain you had a dead 50 and a drifting scope and 1 medic against 40 men. In that room you had a grievance a colonel was going to use against you. You never once had the advantage. And you won every single time because you were the only one in the fight who understood exactly what you were holding and exactly where it had to go." He shook his head. "Voss had rank connections, a head start in 6 years of practice burying people. And you beat him with a comms log and 4 people who'd follow you off a cliff. That's not luck, Carter. That's the thing they tried to erase, and it turns out you can't erase it. You can only fail to notice it for a while." Maya drank her coffee and didn't argue, because there was no arguing with Ramsey when he was right, and he was right. The general kept his word too. He'd told her in that room with Voss barely out the door that the Army had been wasting her in more places than one, and he'd meant it. When the dust settled, he offered her something she'd never expected and had to sit with for 3 full days before she understood what it was. He offered her the chance to build a program. A small one at first, quiet, the kind of thing the Army lets a general fund when he's owed favors and wants to spend them on something that matters. It would train precision shooters, yes, but that wasn't the heart of it. The heart of it was something Maya had said in that room and the general had never forgotten. There's another Maya Carter out there right now being made small by someone afraid of what she might notice. The program was for them, the overlooked ones, The soldiers with a gift buried under someone else's paperwork, the ones who'd been reassigned into invisibility, the ones the machine had decided were problems because they noticed things they weren't supposed to notice. The general couldn't undo every burial the army had ever performed, but he could hand one formerly buried soldier the authority to go dig and see who was still down there, still sleeping, still waiting for the world to remember to look. Maya said yes on the third day. Ethan Brooks was the first person she called. He was back on light duty by then, healed as much as a man heals from something like that, which is to say mostly with a scar and a limp in the cold, and a story he told at every opportunity exactly the way Maya had predicted. When she told him about the program, he was quiet for a long moment on the line. "You're going to go find people like you," he said, "the ones nobody sees." "I'm going to go find people like you too, Brooks. You almost didn't make it off that mountain because the man who ran the mission cared more about his own hide than the soldiers under him." That's the other half of it. It's not just finding the buried ones, it's teaching the ones who lead them not to bury anybody in the first place. She paused. "I want you to help me. When you're Rawed, I want the first thing every soldier in that program hears to be the story of a sergeant who got shot on a mountain and lived because somebody the army had thrown away picked up a rifle. I want them to understand what it costs when you decide a person doesn't matter." "Carter," Brooks said, and his voice had gone rough, "I'll tell that story anywhere you want, as many times as you want, for the rest of my life. You gave me a rest of my life. Telling the story is the least I can do with it." The program started small, the way the general said it would. A dozen soldiers in the first group, handpicked every one of them, someone a review board somewhere had written off. There was a young woman who'd been the best marksman in her unit until she reported a supply theft and found herself suddenly unqualified. There was a soldier who'd been quietly shelved after questioning an order that turned out later to have been catastrophically wrong. There was a man twice Maya's age who'd been a legend once and had spent a decade being told one small silence at a time that his day had passed. Maya looked at all of them on the first morning, and she saw 6 years of herself standing in a row, and she understood that the general had not given her a job. He'd given her a mirror and told her to go break every other person out of the same one. She did not go easy on them. That surprised some of them, the ones who expected the woman who'd been erased to be gentle with people who'd been erased. But Maya knew something about being buried that the gentle ones didn't. She knew that the worst thing you could do for a person the world had made small was to treat them as though they were fragile. She'd been treated as fragile for 6 years, handed gauze, and told to focus on the pressure dressing, and it had nearly convinced her that fragile was all she was. So she trained them hard. She put rifles in their hands and drift in their scopes and cold in their fingers and impossible shots in front of them, and she watched them discover one by one that the thing they'd been told they'd lost had never actually gone anywhere. "You've been shooting in your head this whole time," she told the young woman with the supply theft the second week when the woman's hands finally remembered what her file said they'd forgotten. "I know you have. I can see it. You've been correcting everyone around you for years without saying a word because you learned that saying it out loud got you punished. Well, say it out loud here. This is the one place where noticing things is the whole point." The woman looked at her and her eyes filled, and she didn't say anything, because some things are too big for the first time you're allowed to feel them. Maya knew that look. She'd worn it herself on a mountain when a lieutenant commander called her by a name she thought had died. Hendricks visited once near the end of the first group's training. He watched from the back of the range arms folded that unblinking stillness, and when the day was done, he came and stood next to Maya and watched the 12 of them walk off the line taller than they'd walked on when they arrived. "You know what I see," Hendricks said. "Tell me." 12 ghosts," he said, learning they're allowed to be alive. He turned to her. "You did that. 6 months ago, you were confined to quarters by a lie, and now there's a room full of people who were disappearing, and they're not disappearing anymore because you decided the thing that happened to you wasn't going to keep happening to everyone else." He was quiet a moment. "I've handed a lot of rifles to a lot of people in my career, Carter. Handing you that DMR on the mountain is the best thing I ever did with a weapon. Not because of the shot, because of what the shot woke up." Maya watched her 12 soldiers walk toward the barracks in the fading light, and she thought about a folder sliding across a table 6 years ago, and a colonel's smile and a review board that never asked her side. She thought about how close she'd come so many times to accepting the small, quiet life they'd built for her, to deciding that being right in private was enough, to letting the ghost stay buried because coming back cost too much. Can I tell you something, sir? She said. Something I've never said out loud. Always. For a long time, I thought the tragedy was the 6 years, the time they took, the career that got buried, the recognition. I lost all of it. And it was a tragedy, don't get me wrong. She watched the last of her soldiers disappear into the barracks. But that's not the part that keeps me up anymore. The part that keeps me up is how close I came to agreeing with them. How many mornings I woke up and told myself I was just a medic. How good I got at not looking at the wound. Voss buried me, sir, but I'm the one who nearly kept myself buried because it hurt less to stay down than to fight my way back up. She turned to him. That's what this program is really for. It's not about the rifles. Any range can teach a rifle. It's about getting to people before they start agreeing with the ones who buried them. Because the burial isn't the thing that kills you. Believing it is. Hendricks nodded slowly, and for once he had nothing to add because there was nothing to add. The years went on the way years do, and the program grew quietly at first, and then not quietly because results are the one thing the Army can't ignore forever. The soldiers Maya trained went back to their units, changed, and their units noticed, and word moved the way word moves faster than any order. Somewhere along the way, the thing stopped being an experiment, a general funded with favors, and became something permanent, something with a name, something young soldiers heard about and wanted. And every group that came through it heard on the first morning the same two stories. They heard about a sergeant who got shot on a mountain and lived because someone the Army had thrown away picked up a rifle. And they heard about the woman who threw that rifle's impossible shot, the medic. They forgot the shooter, they buried the ghost, who walked into a warm room and refused to disappear a second time. Maya never told the stories herself. She had Brooks tell the first one every time right up until he retired, and after that she had one of the soldiers she'd trained tell it, passing it down the way. Real things get passed down hand to hand, person to person, never in a file. And she had someone else tell the second one, the one about her, because she'd learned something on that mountain that she never unlearned. The most powerful stories are the ones you're not in the room to control. She wanted her story to belong to the people it was for, not to her. She wanted it to be theirs to carry the way. The truth of a mountain belongs to everyone who survives it. On the last day before she finally retired, decades and hundreds of soldiers later, a young private found her on the range packing up and hovered, the way the young ones hover when they've worked up the courage to ask something. "Sergeant Major," the private said, because that's what Maya was by then, "is it true, the story, the mountain, the dead rifle, all of it? Or is it just the thing they tell us on the first day to make us feel like we matter?" Maya Carter looked at the young soldier, and she saw the way she always saw, the small, quiet fear underneath. The question, the fear of a person who'd been made to feel like furniture with a pulse, and desperately wanted to believe they could be more. "Let me tell you the only part of that story that matters," Maya said. "It's not the shot. Anybody with enough training and enough cold in their hands can be taught to make the shot. The part that matters is that there was a moment on that mountain when the person everyone had forgotten could have stayed forgotten, could have laid the rifle down, could have let the convoy pass and gone home the medic they wanted her to be, and nobody would have blamed her because nobody expected anything else." She held the private's eyes, and she picked it up anyway. That's the whole story, not the shot. The choice to be seen when staying invisible would have been so much easier. "But how did she know she could make it?" the private asked. "The shot. How did she know it was still there after 6 years?" And Maya Carter smiled the way she'd smiled at Ethan Brooks all those years ago when she finally gave him his answer, and she said the last true thing she'd say on that range before she walked off it for good. She didn't know, Maya said. That's the part nobody tells you. She wasn't sure the gift was still there. She wasn't sure the shot was even possible. She'd been made small for so long that most of her believed she really was just a medic. She picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder, the same steady hands, older now, but steady still. But here's what she understood that the ones who buried her never did. You don't wait until you're sure you can do the thing before you decide to try. If you wait to be sure, you'll wait forever because the people who buried you spent years making certain you'd never feel sure again. You act first. You pick up the rifle first. And then you find out in the doing that everything they told you you'd lost was sitting there the whole time, waiting for the moment you were brave enough to reach for it. The private stood very still, and Maya could see the story landing in the place it was meant to land, the same place it had landed in 12 Ghosts on a Range a lifetime ago, the place where a person stops believing the small, quiet lie they've been told about themselves. Nobody who's real ever really disappears, Maya said, and she'd been saying it for decades now, and it had never once stopped being true. They just wait for the day the world remembers to look. And if the world takes too long, then you remember to look at yourself. You pick up the rifle, and you remind everyone, including you, exactly what they threw away. Then Sergeant Major Maya Carter walked off the range for the last time into a life she'd fought 6 years in a mountain and a colonel and her own buried heart to earn, leaving behind a young private who would tell that story someday to someone else who needed it, and that someone would tell it to another on and on, hand to hand, the way real things survive. The Army forgot her once. It would never forget her again. And neither would the hundreds of soldiers who walked taller because a woman with a dead rifle and a drifting scope decided on a frozen mountain that being forgotten was a thing you were allowed to refuse. The ghost came back, and in coming back, she made certain no one else would ever have to stay buried in the dark. That is where Maya Carter's story ends and where the story of everyone she saved begins.